All right, I think what we have is an exciting agenda. I'm going to use that adjective. And so to start, Mr. Allen, would you please review, well, actually, let's get the boring part over with, which is the approval of the minutes. I understand there's at least one that needs a minor amendment. Mr. Alberts?
Yes, I'd like to amend the minutes of the June 1st meeting. In the fourth paragraph, I'm referred to as Mr. Scott as opposed to Mr. Alberts. I do like Star Trek, but Scott is my first name, whatever is appropriate there. I'd like to move to amend just that minor item, but otherwise motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, I have no edits. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion is approved. Now, Mr. Allen, would you please review the agenda, paying particular attention to calling out the action items for the public, because we will be having public comment immediately thereafter.
So immediately following the public comment next will be a report by myself on general preparations underway for the November election. That's not an action item. Initial recommendations for precinct realignments and consolidations, and this is actually an action item where the board will consider whether to authorize legal review both by the solicitor and the Court of Common Pleas of filings, and legal review also being the preparation of verbal descriptions of the consolidated precincts, as well as posting of notices in the precincts and other public notice ahead of any kind of action in the court to seek the consolidations. Next are on the agenda were the initial recommendations for Dropbox reductions. We had put together a preliminary list of 9 after studying data that involved usage, as well as a SEPTA overlay to make sure that if we took one Dropbox out, regardless of how lightly it were used, that we would still have access for that community to a neighboring community. Just as background, Delaware County is, I'm not sure if the word blessed is correct, but with an abundance, 39 Dropboxes by comparison. Montgomery County, which is 1.5 times our size, has 12. And Philadelphia, which is many times our size, has 16. For administrative reasons, and just managing the cameras and everything else that goes with that, I was looking at reducing that by 9. However, we have yet to have outreach to the affected communities, and I would recommend tabling that matter for now until the subsequent meeting. Capital improvement approval is just a status report on the electronic poll books, the solicitor report, any litigation updates if needed, as well as a review of the rule for candidates, a restriction on candidates as to serve as poll watchers in the precincts where their names are on the ballot while the polls are open. Then campaign finance waiver requests. We have a few first-time offenders who have requested waivers of their fines. And then the next is an item I left that's on the, or it says error. There is no voter registration commission until a separate meeting after this. Then that is all.
All right, do we need to amend the agenda to remove that item?
I think we can just skip over item 9.
Yeah, we could just talk about it for 1 second. All right. Then with that, we're going to start with public comment. For everybody's awareness, just a reminder that everybody has 3 minutes to speak, and please say your name and your address. However, I'm going to ask the councilwoman, she has a meeting later today, this morning, if she would please come first to start the public comment.
Well, I think the most important comment from my perspective, but thank you. I'm Christine Ruther, Delaware County Council person. My office is here at 201 West Front Street, Media, PA. I wanted to talk about both the precinct reduction and the drop boxes. I will just note, I know we're tabling the Dropbox issue, or you're going to table it when you get to it, but to be clear, council put in the number of drop boxes it did, and I've said this before at your meetings, but I wanted it on the record for this purpose. because we had just taken over in 2020 when we were facing this massive election. And as the pandemic was starting, we wanted safe ways for people to return their mailboxes. We used outside grant money to build out the network. And we, rather than run what I saw as an unnecessary risk to the credibility of the drop boxes, of only putting them in certain places, even with well-defined criteria about maybe the number of people who had cars or didn't have cars or who were elderly or what have you, and more likely to not want to go to the polls. We just offered them to every municipality, and you know, it fell out the way it fell out in terms of who took them and who didn't. And again, since we did use third-party grant money, which is no longer available to the county, the cost of the rather extensive and somewhat accelerated build-out was not borne by taxpayers. But I will note, as a member of council, that the cost of maintaining those drop boxes, particularly the cameras, which are necessary under, you know, the guidance received from the Department of State, is expensive. And many of those cameras already need to be swapped out. I think some of it was because of the way in which the procurement was done. It was very rapid, and we took what was available as opposed to necessarily scoping out the best cameras. It is very expensive to redo that and to consider maintaining it. And so while I am not in favor of reducing the number of drop boxes, and I don't think anybody on council is, we are cognizant of the budget issues, which now under state law will be borne by county taxpayers. And so the other thing is, I am grateful to the Board of Elections for stepping up and working with your election staff to determine where the most appropriate places would be to leave boxes. I would ask that you are really clear and transparent with the public about what your criteria is. And again, we will follow your guidance on this. We do not want to make that determination. Our goal would be to have a drop box on every corner if that were permissible, but with the cost of the cameras, it's not. As far as the consolidation of the precincts go, I am an advocate. I don't know how much there is in savings, but as a person who works closely with my local committee and with the committee chair for the Republicans in my township to staff precincts, and I've done this for many years, it is really hard. And we've got a bunch of micro precincts in my town. And there's simply, when you've only got 100 registered voters in a precinct, finding 5 people of different parties who are willing to work every election can be really, really hard, which means that the benefit of having that precinct, i.e. somebody who lives nearby and knows the folks, is not served. And I think there are places all around the county. Mr. Allen knows where they are. I'm sure many of you know where they are. I know Mr. Alberts knows where they are in Upper Darby, that it's just really hard to staff, and we are pulling in people from outside that precinct, often outside the municipality. And these changes are to make sure that we can effectively staff all of our precincts. There will be some savings, but that I don't think is a driver. Again, as you do the consolidation, I would ask that you be extremely transparent about the criteria that you're using to consolidate and why the recommendations have been made. I know it's been well thought out. I know a lot of time and energy has gone into it, but it will be, you know, again, I'm supportive of it. I think council is supportive of it, but we just ask that you be as transparent as possible about the criteria for making those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And absolutely, I think that is our goal. And I hope that today, I know that you won't be able to attend the whole time, but it is our intention to put out there fully what we are looking to do, and also to have the conversations with the communities in which we're looking to make changes. So thank you very much, sir.
Morning, council members. Paul Rumley, Springfield. Following up from our last meeting, my colleagues and I spent time looking into problems with the ERIC system. This is some of what we found out.
Sir,
Would-
if I may, the ERIC system is going to be on the next meeting agenda, meaning the one that immediately follows this morning.
Right.
So if you have public
I
comment.
have to leave early.
Oh, you
okay
do?
here for
Okay,
You're
fair
welcome
enough.
to make any public comment you want. He was just
Thank
letting you know that it will be on the
That's
agenda
fine.
of the
Thank
next
you.
meeting. Yeah, thank you.
With the recent addition of Texas, 9 states, 1/3 of those participating have opted out of ERIC. There are many reasons for doing so. I highlight 2 of them. ERIC advertises itself as a system for cleansing voter rolls. It does a mediocre job at best. It compares voter lists with driver's license databases amongst the participating states and flags duplicates. It then sends the duplicates back to the states to be reconciled. The other primary ERIC activity is new voter registration. It was found to be highly partisan in its methods. The voter roll cleansing feature is inadequate. It focuses on only one form of invalid voter registration, duplicate driver's licenses. Omega for America, operated by Jay Valentine, has been invited to inspect voter rolls of several states and counties. They do so by comparing voter addresses to a highly reliable source, real estate tax records. In every voter roll inspected, they found huge volumes of fraudulent registrations that never get flagged by ERIC. They found voters registered to addresses like 7-Elevens, vacant lots, apartment buildings with no apartment number, and even totally fictitious streets. ERIC does nothing to flag these types of fraudulent registrations. Ballots mailed to fake addresses wind up as return mail. They can then be collected by corrupt individuals, filled out and submitted on behalf of favored candidates. This is the reality of mail-in voting, notoriously corrupt and banned by governments around the world. This is a scheme that is Act 77 in Pennsylvania. States leaving ERIC finally figured this out. ERIC is primarily a voter registration operation hiding behind a mediocre cleansing operation. And their registration efforts are partisan, focused on registering voters who will reliably vote in one direction. Pennsylvania and Delaware County need to take back responsibility for the integrity of their voter rolls. The county and the state should immediately opt out of ERIC and develop their own system to maintain voter rolls. Hire Omega for America or a similar organization to assist with the technology. Act 77 is unconstitutional and will eventually be repealed. Pennsylvania needs to revert to the 5 basics: same-day voting, paper ballots, voter ID, hand counting, and absentee ballots for hardship and military personnel only. Pennsylvania needs to return to free and fair.
Thank you. I just want to note, because it's not going to be on this agenda and you won't be here, just a reminder that Ms. Winterbottom, who may be the most nonpartisan person I've ever met, she served both administrations, Republican, Democrat, came and gave extensive comments about the use of ERIC by the voter registration department. And really, I thought if you see the tape, you could see the surprise in her comments that anybody would think that it wasn't just an incredibly useful tool for trying to make sure that the voter rolls are accurate for our county. And so just if anybody has an opportunity, I just call back attention to her prior statements that were, I thought, pretty effective, completely honest, based on 20 years, however many years of work that she's done, the effectiveness that ERIC has provided to her team in trying to make sure that our voter rolls are accurate. It was pretty impressive statements, and I remind everybody of that.
And Madam Chair, at the following meeting, Michelle Donardis is going to be speaking on behalf of Crystal, who's off today, giving the data on the latest items that have come through the ERIC system. That I'm kind of stunned to hear the comments that this is a mediocre at best system. It is the most effective system that is in place. The states that have departed, I'll be giving a full report on the states who, as recently as February and January of this year, praised ERIC as they even called it a godsend. And suddenly, they had a turn of heart. But I'll be going over that during the meeting, in part because the speaker who just presented pointed at me at the last meeting. And when I said I could not understand why other states were leaving the ERIC system, he told me that I should do my job and find that out. I don't know if you recall that. So I have done my job, and I will be issuing that report explaining the rather bizarre hypocrisies that have occurred just in the last few months with states departing ERIC and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any other public comment? Please.
I've got to leave early too, so I wanted to have 2 minutes on Eric. Most of you, not you guys.
You have
You're-
3 minutes total. You can talk about whatever you want. If you want to talk about Eric, that's fine. And what's your name, sir?
It's John Child. I'm precinct committee man down in Radnor, Ward 7, Precinct 2, 308 Rockingham Road in Garrett Hill. Most of you, well, Jim, you have, Bradley, you haven't, and none of you have, because all of the registered certified mail went to Seaport, which I understood was your address. So you'll be seeing this notice. We sent out about 20 notices of demand to Pennsylvania government workers to cease and desist ERIC contract. The notices went out to 20 officials in Harrisburg, Media, and Chester. Overall questions for you all. We all agree that it's your duty to protect the people's life, liberty, property, and security. We agree on that. So the question is, what have you done to ensure the ERIC system has not allowed the people's personal identifiable information to be misused? Have any of you been to the ERIC headquarters? It's 2 hours south on 95 in DC. Have you talked to any of the people in the 9 states who have left the ERIC? There's Texas, Florida, Virginia, Missouri, Iowa, Ohio, West Virginia, Louisiana. Second point is ERIC is proprietary. So the question is, what have you done to prove that ERIC is not working against the interests of the people by sharing all of our private information with God knows who? Third point, can you show us where we, the people, gave you folks prior consent to change government by signing the ERIC contract? Today, you have a chance and a duty to do the right thing for the people that you represent. Now is the time to end the ERIC contract, and here's why. Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, all the power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on the people's authority and instituted for the people's peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of these ends, the people have at all times an inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such a manner as the people may think proper. Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 20 is the right of petition. Citizens have a right in a peaceful manner to assemble together for the common good and apply those invested with the powers of the government for redress of grievances and or other proper purposes by petition, address, and remonstrance, or remonstrance. There's a word you don't use every day of the week. Article 4 is the oath of office. All of you folks have taken an oath. Basically, I do solemnly swear and affirm that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Pennsylvania Commonwealth. And I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. Anybody who doesn't take the oath has to forfeit his office. And we've got maximum laws that private contracts cannot derogate contract from the public law. So in conclusion, what have you done to ensure ERIC is not allowing the people's personal identifiable information to be misdirected? And I think I made my point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I'm sorry you won't be able to attend, but Mr. Allen's comments at the Voter Registration Commission meeting should be public and available at some point shortly after our meeting. So I hope you have an opportunity to review them.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning. My name is Joanne Stump, Newtown Square. The utmost responsibility of the town council is the protection of its citizens. Delaware County's participation in the ERIC threatens the security of the personal information. PA is required by agreement with ERIC to provide all motor vehicle information to ERIC. This includes my name, address, email, date of birth, license number, and last 4 digits of my social security. That information is shared by ERIC to organizations which do not have to be disclosed to the state. Hence, Delaware County is sharing my personal data with who knows who. I'm in agreement with Florida's Secretary of State when he said, after Eric was suspended there, I have an obligation to protect the personal information of Florida's citizens, which the Eric Agreement requires us to share. Louisiana suspended Eric because of database access by possible partisan actors. Alabama's Secretary of State cited his apprehension over a private organization's access to minors. The motor vehicle rolls given to Eric include minors who are not eligible to vote. Why? In addition, the DMV rolls also provide the names of non-citizens. Why? Interesting that Eric's rules state under no circumstances shall the members transmit any record indicating an individual is a non-citizen or of the US, end quote. Eric doesn't want to know why. It is a violation of federal law for an alien to register to vote in a federal election, and all states prohibit aliens from voting in state elections. Yet Eric requires states to send out registration information to 95% of this database, which includes non-citizens, hence a potential felony. The public citizens can't access this database, but Eric has free liberties to share with whomever they wish and not have to disclose these organizations. Hence, why this is an agreement and not a contract. An agreement is a gentleman's promise. A contract is legally enforceable. I have no control whatsoever of my personal information and no legal recourse to protect it from Eric. Eric has only a handful of employees, making it most likely that it is subcontracting their data analysis to another entity. Their 2020 tax year showed that it paid almost $500,000 to Alpine Consulting, raising serious questions as to whom else has been given this valuable information. States can access their own federal databases to maintain their voter roll accuracy. The percentage of duplicate state registration is a very small percentage overall of the database. The protection of Delaware County citizens' personal information should be the highest priority of the town council. We need to leave Eric. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Ms. Gunn.
Morning, my name is Colleen Guiney, 337 Dickinson Avenue in Swarthmore. I just wanted to get back to the items on the agenda today for this meeting. And I wanted to thank you guys for working hard at trying to reduce the number of polling places that are very small in this county. Just to reiterate what Councilwoman Ruther was saying, I've been working for many years trying to help staffing, and many of my neighbors can no longer help me in Swarthmore because they're going to other communities to help open their polls. And I'm happy they're doing that. I think that the chronic shortage of poll workers has been managed very well by a hardworking group of people that are trying to help move people around. But the goal obviously is to try to make sure that the polls are of an efficient size so that voters can vote locally. And I think that the comments that Christine made about the transparency of how you make this decision is important, because lots of folks like to do what they did last year. So it's going to be disruptive to voters to have to possibly have a new number on their polling place. I think the beauty, though, of where we are now is that because of the consolidations that had to happen due to COVID, many of these folks will just be in the same building and just have a different number on their card. And that will then make it much easier for the Board of Elections to staff all of these polling places. So I thank you for working on this complicated project. And again, look forward to seeing a transparent view of how you've made those decisions. The other comment that I want to make is regarding candidates as poll watchers while polls are open. I do not believe that candidates should ever be in a polling place electioneering, nor do I think that elected officials should be in a polling place electioneering. Nor do I think that some other person from another part of the county should be in a polling place electioneering. And while the stakes are quite high, I've heard of many stories of non-candidates inside electioneering, where judges of election or poll watchers from another party would have to remind those people that that's not an appropriate thing to do. So I also know that there are many candidates that want to be in for the count, and they can't unless they have a poll watcher certificate. So I would urge the board to consider allowing candidates to have a poll watcher certificate. If it's possible to mark them that they shouldn't be in there during the day, I wouldn't have any problem with that if that's within the law. I'm not a lawyer. But I do believe that there are many good candidates who just want to know what's going on at the count, and allowing them to have a poll watcher certificate, I think would be helpful for the management of elections. So I thank you for your time and your service and all the hard work you do for free and fair elections in Delaware County. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gunny. Good morning.
Good morning, Karis Coker, 836 Concord Road, Glen Mills. At the beginning of each meeting, there is the Pledge of Allegiance to the Republic for which it stands. And I'm here to preserve that republic. About the addition of including the poll books throughout the county, as well as involvement in the ERIC system. The digital world is such a globally interconnected community that it is impossible to protect the data and to secure our own national interest or in our own county's interest as of the government or of the citizens. This is cause enough to reject the use of the electronic poll pads, to step out of the ERIC system, and to reevaluate the use of electronic computerized voting systems entirely. Are we to believe that while every other electronic digital system is subject to being hacked, and this is a global concern, and one of the major avenues of that concern is just simply type in the 8200 intelligence unit of the Israeli Defense Force. And globally, there's much concern about their infiltration and use of data that doesn't belong to them, whether it's banking, college records, employment information, and so forth. The personal computers, the airline scheduling, all this is at risk of being hacked or sabotaged. Everything we are to believe except voting systems. You know better. And furthermore, you are bound by your oath of office to protect, to support, and defend our national and our Commonwealth constitutions. To continue down this path of the electronic inclusion is to knowingly violate your oath of office. And in so doing, you justify and you magnify our appeal to heaven. And in the words of Patrick Henry, there is a just God who rules in the affairs of nations, that God who endowed us with certain unalienable rights, the God to whom you are accountable to uphold and defend our free constitutional government with the consent of the governed. You are bound by oath or by affirmation, as in the case of Mr. Alberts, and by duty of the office that you hold to reject the electronic poll pads and to get out of the ERIC system. Thank you.
Any other public, Ms. Schwartz?
Good morning, Board of Elections.
Good morning.
Joy Schwartz, 514 Lombardi Road in Drexel Hill. So I have commented many times on the consolidation of precincts, and I understand, as I've said before, that there are many small ones that do need consolidation in order to be more efficient and to be able to get enough poll workers to work them and to perhaps save on the budget as well. However, I also discourage over consolidation of these precincts. The election code states that no voting district should exceed 1,200 voters, and yet we're going right up to the brink of 1,200 voters in our consolidation. Wouldn't it be wise to keep the size of the precincts a little bit below that limit to allow for growth, so that if 200 people move into a new neighborhood, or suddenly we have like a huge increase in voter registrations in that precinct, that you wouldn't have to have an issue with the size of that precinct and being in violation of the election code. I also understand that there are some precincts in Delaware County that are very, very large. And I would love to hear some comments on what's going to happen with those as well. In the last Board of Elections meeting, I believe Mr. McBlain requested a list from Mr. Allen about which precincts that we're looking at. And Mr. Allen, I believe, said there's about 70 of them that he's considering. So I was wondering if somebody could address that at some point today. I have comments about ERIC, but I'll save those for later. I also wanted to comment once again on No Inc., which is the company that has provided the electronic poll books that we tested during the primary election. Election Watch has reported that some people who have given contributions to Act Blue unknowingly became part of a money laundering scheme to funnel millions of dollars into political campaigns through what's called Smurfs. These are basically people who launder money. The company that was associated with this scandal it's happened mostly in Maryland, where there were people of modest means who were discovered to have given thousands and thousands of dollars to Act Blue, which they in fact did not give. It was somehow given in their name through a bunch of small contributions. BPro, which is owned by NoLink, is the company that was associated with the scandal. BPro was purchased by NoInc in 2021. NoInc is basically a monopoly that serves 36 states, about 50% of registered voters in the United States. And they're the ones that are supplying our poll books. I ask that you look into this more before we make a final commitment on NoInc and BPro. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, then, Mr. Allen, we'll start with the election preparations, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and fellow board members. So election preparations have begun. The state has opened up its online system for either downloading an application to vote absentee or by mail, or to apply to register to vote or update your registration. And those systems are up and running. We've also carried over from the spring primary election all of the applications that were approved and voter ID verified to queue those up for the fall election. The ones that had to be voter ID verified must be ID verified again. So we knew which ones had been approved. So we're in the process of contacting those voters to make sure that you know, those IDs, such as a driver's license, state ID, or social security number, are valid. So that work is underway at the wharf. Beyond that, we've also added a new hire. I want to recognize Anthony Oriente, who's joined us as office manager, basically the voter service center manager for the bureau operation that is still here in media. He's replacing. So thank you for joining us, Tony. Next up, initial recommendations for the precinct realignments and consolidations. We had more than 100 precincts that we were examining for possible consolidation based on their relatively small number of registered voters. Again, as background, Montgomery County has 600,000 voters, 1.5 times as many as our 400,000. And Montgomery County has 426 precincts. Delaware County has 428. The precinct lines have largely been intact for many decades and go back to the vestiges of an older time when sometimes polling places were literally in people's homes or garages. And it's a throwback in some cases, and it's very challenging for us to find adequate and accessible polling places, as well as poll workers. And we're down to 98 precincts here that we've identified for 49 possible consolidations. And in those, I'm informed by staff that of the 288 possible elected officials in those precincts, 58% are vacant. So when you talk about just the judge, the majority inspector, and the minority inspector, well, more than half of those positions are vacant. And that speaks to the the issue that it is to find and train and assign poll workers who are going to be able to serve the voters. Secondly, as far as just sheer election administration, any reduction you can have of the excessive number of polling places has a ripple effect in terms of programming the ballots, programming and testing equipment, delivering that equipment, finding poll workers, training poll workers, payroll of the poll workers, the printing of the ballots and reducing the number of ballot styles, and then the returns and the V drives and the return board work. And it just goes on and on and on. This is an extremely healthy exercise, one that we obviously couldn't undertake in 2021. We were making other modifications, but it has been on our radar screen since 2021. Both the council and the board here have talked with me about reducing the number of precincts. So with that, I would ask for a motion to allow for legal review of the potential consolidations, to include the solicitor's review and then the posting of public notices and the filing of notices in the Court of Common Pleas for these 49 precincts, or 48 rather, consolidations, as well as the one additional reduction that we are going to gain through the realignment of the wards in Radnor Township. They've realigned it so that we have the ability to reduce one precinct there.
Mr. Allen, I do have some wording for that motion that I intend to propose to the board. But just to go back for a second, yesterday, I understand, and Mr. Parks, at some point, I do want to just have you talk about that, as you came closer to the recommendation or made the recommendation to the board offline, I wanted to make sure that it passed legal review. This is inherently a legal process to redistrict, and there are many, many legal considerations as you've inferred. So I do want to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about the community involvement, because that is so important to us, that the communities understand the what and why. They are the most supportive in providing those election workers. Even when there are vacancies, there's still the community step up and staff the polls, because we end up ultimately having our polls staffed and staffed by great public service from our community residents. So could you please just talk briefly about some of the outreach that you've made and the continued outreach you intend?
Really, the initial outreach has involved talking with both party leaders, both major party leaders. But there have been discussions going back to before I was here in 2020 between our poll worker coordinator type staff as well and ward leaders, who often are the ones who are pressed to try to find individuals to staff these polls. And sometimes it literally comes down to the 3, 4, 5 days before election day, where they're trying to make emergency appointments and making dozens of phone calls in their free time to try to find individuals who are willing to show up and work an extremely long day. And so that's the next step, is to work through our poll worker coordinator on reaching out to the ward leaders. A number of these possible consolidations are based on population changes, are focused in various communities, but there are a number of them that are in Upper Darby and Chester City. And so we're going to be working next with ward leaders and party leaders at the municipal level.
Okay. And Mr. Allen, you've proposed to us 2 sets of data that I think now that and again, Mr. Parks, I'm going to ask you in just one moment, I promise, that have been reviewed now by our solicitor. There are two sets. One relates to the numbers of voters in those particular places that you recommend consolidation, and the other is some maps to indicate the contiguous borders. I understand, I don't believe that those have been published at this point. Maybe they've been shared with party leaders, but not yet published.
No, they have not been published yet.
And there's been a call from everybody, I think, who spoke on this issue, from any position that they could stand for transparency on that. So I think that, Mr. Solicitor, would you talk about your review and whether or not we're in a position to share the information that we're looking at? Obviously, some of it will come out through all the legal process, but if you could also walk through that a little bit as well.
Sure. So we have reviewed the legal steps associated with this process and prepared some guidance for our election director and ultimately for the members of the board. That has been shared with the members of the board in a attorney-client privileged and attorney work product communication describing those steps and including some recommendations about that. But the big picture here is that the process would involve going to the court and petitioning the Court of Common Pleas of Delaware County to redistrict as is being proposed, that the information about the proposed redistricting would then be posted in the affected areas.
It's pretty extensive posting requirements.
It
right?
is. And then there would be a hearing at the Court of Common Pleas not sooner than 10 days after the posts have gone up, at which the Court of Common Pleas would consider the petition for the redistricting, as well as any, folks who appear and oppose it, if there are any. And then ultimately there would be a ruling from the Court of Common Pleas that information about the new districts then goes up to Harrisburg. Harrisburg has an opportunity to review the new districts as approved by the court and determine if Harrisburg agrees that they meet the requirements of the law. And ultimately, if they don't object to those districts, then those districts are the new districts go into effect, and voters will be notified that they had their district, they're in a different district now. So
in addition to any conversations Mr. Allen has had with initially the party leaders, the ongoing conversations for years with the voting voter poll workers and others, and then the upcoming conversations with the board leaders, the general public will have postings in multiple locations throughout their community that make them aware of this opportunity. And on top of that, I am proposing that we publish on our website the information. So is that correct?
that's correct. And I certainly don't see any reason why we wouldn't publish, the detailed information on the website as a place where people can easily access it. Obviously, we're discussing it in public meetings as well. And there is a public court proceeding on the petition or petitions, depending on how we end up structuring them. But my recommendation would be to do a consolidated petition rather than a single petition for every single proposed change, because that just becomes administratively challenging for the courts and for us.
But so the fact that that hasn't been published yet, there's plenty of opportunity to comment and even object on this if you'd like to. So, okay, but we're at that point where it's consistent with the legal guidance, not going into the details of the guidance itself, although there's statutes and things that do govern this very, very prescriptively. That's what I wanted to make sure. So please, Mr. McLean, normally, are you okay to defer to Mr. Alberts? He's jumping at the bit, or would you like to? No, I want to make sure let's talk to Mr. Parks now, and then we'll go back to Mr. Allen, make sure everybody has a chance to ask questions.
Just two quick points of clarification. When you say Harrisburg, you mean the Secretary of State?
Yes, if you look in the memo that was circulated, you'll see a description of that process.
And the postings are similar to the postings when we make an appointment for filling a vacancy in an election board. Just when you say public postings in the community, we're talking about piece of paper
They're
posted to a
very
public site
specific.
around.
Yeah, there are very specific details about that notice. They first must be posted on or in the immediate vicinity of the polling place in each district. The notice must describe the division, redivision, alteration, formation, or consolidation of election districts recommended by the county board in that district, the number of electors registered in each district at the immediate preceding general or municipal election, the date on which the court will hear the petition, and a warning to any potential objector that objections to the redistricting must be filed with the court, with the clerk of court prior to the date of the hearing. And the notice must be posted at least 10 days in advance of the court hearing on the redistricting petition. So there's some very specific details about what that notice, where that notice is to be posted, how long it's to be up, and what needs to be in it.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Alberts. Mr. McBlain, do you have any questions for the solicitor?
I don't have any questions for the solicitor. I did receive the memo. I don't think it's there. I guess, if.
Well, you didn't receive?
I did.
Oh, okay.
No, I saw that and understood it. I guess I don't know if it's proper now, but I mean, just some general comments. I mean, this is I actually agree with Councilwoman Ruther in terms of what she recommended in terms of making this as transparent as possible. I mean, we're talking about affecting almost a quarter of the precincts in all of the county, and certainly the largest change that would be made in terms of a redistricting process in probably at least 50 plus years in the county. So I would prefer to slow walk it, so to speak, in terms of the public outreach. Again, I had the chance to speak with Mr. Allen yesterday. I don't know that the particular list that's been shared with the board has been shared with members of municipalities, you know, elected officials, town councils, that sort of a thing, to get, you know, their input into it. And I realize that there is a public notice process as part of any court filing, but sort of tacking a card to a telephone pole in one part of a precinct doesn't always do the trick. So I would, you know, urge us, especially for the municipalities that are affected here, to make a direct mailing to their elected representatives to notify them about it, to you know, seek their input, and sort of on a broader perspective, you know, ask county, you know, residents in county municipalities, you know, do they have additional input? I mean, again, they know their towns the best. So maybe they can make suggestions that we haven't been able to identify from a 30,000 foot view or process. And then also, you know, answer questions. Again, just I got the list, I just talked to a couple of people about it. And the first question I get is, well, where's the polling place going to be? That seems to be the, you know, the predominant. Again, I think generally speaking, people aren't opposed to it, but, you know, and then again, what the criteria is in terms of looking at some of these things. I just started to look at it. Certainly most make sense. There are some that, you know, I don't remember off the top of my head what the criteria is in terms of, I know that it's not statutory, but there's a range where we're supposed to have it. You know, we were looking at, for the most part, you know, where precinct where there was, it appears to me where there was less than 500 or perhaps less than 600 voters, you know, merging that with an adjacent precinct. But there's some here, there were, you know, there are two that are over 1,000, you know, voters, almost 2,000. So we're creating a precinct where it's almost 3,000 voters, which, you know, it presents other problems, you know, having, you know, voting in precincts where there's almost that many, especially in a presidential type year. So I think like I said, I'm not sure, maybe I'm just premature here. I don't know that we're up to the point where we want to file something with the court. I mean, that's.
Oh, agreed. No, I do want to be clear. I think that let me tell you the motion that I want to propose is the motion to proceed with the redistricting process, including precinct consolidations and realignments and the initiation of the legal proceedings related thereto. Now we can amend that. My understanding, nothing will be filed without our approval at this point, but there's a lot of work that goes into preparing them.
So, right, so the process would be that based on the work that's been done by Mr. Allen and his staff, we would prepare a petition to the Court of Common Pleas that would seek the redistricting changes and in one instance, a realignment of ward lines that have been identified. Ultimately, that petition would need to be filed with the court. The court would then give us a hearing date. That hearing date would then be included in the notices that have to be posted and would be posted beyond the requirements of the statute on the website, as has been discussed. But the process really starts structurally and formally with a petition being filed with the court and a court hearing date being identified by the judge so that that can be included in the notice that is then posted publicly.
In the initial proposals, I do think, Mr. Allen, there is some work. I mean, I know that there's work in one of the nether consolidation proposals where there's some school district concerns. So there's definitely outreach. I think what Mr. McLean, you're asking is let's confirm the affirmative outreach, right? You're saying let's actively engage those communities. I think Mr. Allen was going to do that, but maybe we could define that and put parameters around that, because I think this list is not necessarily where we end up actually finally petitioning the court for, but I think, Mr. Allen, if you'd also might just respond and also talk a little bit about the concerns about timing, because we do have a major election, not that the elections this year aren't important, but coming up the following year. So we want to be, keep it moving, I think, for reasons to be in good shape going into 2024.
Yes, the timing of this is such that, doing so in between the last year's rather large turnout November election and the primary, wrapping up all the items from that and rolling into the primary. This is the most opportune time to look at the registration numbers from the most recent general election and to look at opportunities to consolidate where it's appropriate before you get into a presidential year, so that voters have a chance this fall to learn their new precincts and then additional mailings that go out. To Mr. McBlain's point, I agree about on polling places and the possibility of changes. But I think as you look through this list, the instances where the two precincts are already voting in the same location represents the vast majority of these. So there's two precincts that are already voting at a Knights of Columbus Hall or Drexel Hill Middle School or Highland Park Elementary. And I agree there are some exceptions where there have been requests for consolidating in Nether Providence that might be more than what the court will allow or what may be advisable. We can scale those back. There are many of these where even when consolidated, they will still have 900, 700, 888, 598, 881, 850 voters, 749 voters. And it's a function of there are community lines and district lines, whether it's a magisterial district judge or a school region or a state house or state senate district, that we're not going to be able to push them all toward 1,000 or 1,200, but there are some consolidations that clearly make sense because they're already voting in the same location. They have common districts, and even when combined, you're looking at 600 to 1,000 voters. Lastly, I would add one of the items I did not mention before, as far as the benefits in terms of transparency. It's easier for poll watchers to monitor, a dozen locations or a dozen precincts in the results as opposed to 15. So I appreciate that this is the number of precincts we're talking about consolidating is 98, taking those down to 49. However, 49 represents a little more than 12%, 13% of the number of precincts that we have now. So we would be going, even if we enacted all of these, and I doubt we will, we're talking about going from 428 to about a little more than 378.
Earlier today, it was mentioned by one of the public comment that there's a hard rule about 1,200. I did not think that I'd like to talk about that. What is the rule on size?
There is such a rule on the books. I will need to look at what courts have done with that, because ever since I've been involved in anything to do with elections dating back to the mid 2000s, or, you know, like the first decade of the new
A
century.
long time.
That's not been observed in any county that I'm aware of. They have large precincts in Montgomery County and Chester County and in Bucks County and here in Delaware County. So I'm going to have to investigate that, but there is such a provision in the code. It seems to not be enforced, and I've never seen a legal proceeding challenging it.
Just if I may, because I do know this part of the code pretty well for a non-lawyer. It says no precinct shall be constituted with fewer than 100 voters.
Right.
That's a hard rule.
Yes.
It says no precinct should be greater than 1,200 voters without good cause shown. So that flexibility there has obviously been employed throughout the Commonwealth. But you know, whether good cause is capable of being shown or not, I think we should certainly be prepared to defend it on that basis. I think we do have good cause when we have large precincts like that in those cases, and we should be prepared to explain that is all.
Thank you for reminding me. That's what I was not remembering. And Mr. Allen, there are some that the proposal does bring them, as Mr. McLean. I think those are ones that you're concerned about, right? For reasons that our ballpark we set as guidance, all of us agreed was around 1,200. So could we talk about those? Because I think you've talked about the smaller ones are easy, right? I think they're easy to understand.
Yeah, there are a small number. Those are concentrated in Nether Providence that would exceed 1,200. There's only one. So if we were to combine, for example, Nether Providence 1-1 and 1-2, which are already both voting at Strathaven Middle School, it would create a precinct of 1,648. If we were to combine Nether Providence 2-1 and 2-2, also voting at the same location, it would create a precinct of 1,400. If we were to, the one that Mr. McBlain flagged was the following, Nether Providence 4-1 and 4-2, which share the same spot and have for several elections now, including 2020, at the Acme Shopping Center in Media. That would create a combination of 2,700 voters.
I could be wrong, but I understood Nether to well be actively asking for this, the leaders and the those who help staff the polls. Is that?
Yes, it's the only reason I Right.
Because of the number.
Mr. Parks has to show good cause. And if the community is saying that this is right for these reasons in our community, that's the type of exception we need to know if we're going to go request a consolidation that's bigger than the
I think on the opposite end of this process, at least what I've seen or heard over, you know, I mean, we've had a great increase in the amount of voters who have participated in elections over these last last presidential election cycles. And I mean, I vote in Albany, so everybody goes to the same place. So we have almost 4,000 people whenever they go there. And, you know, inevitably when there's 250 or 300 people in line at 7 a.m. on a presidential general election, you know, the hue and cry is you got to create more precincts, you know, so that the lines aren't long and people aren't discouraged and go away. And then that kind of fades off as the presidential election is over and you're back to a municipal primary where maybe and no one comes, you know, there. So that's what I'm just conscious of, that, you know, that's why I just sort of. For any particular
we
reason.
actually legally have to justify it. We have to show good cause if we're going to make a consolidation recommendation.
But to sort of wrap up my remarks, Madam Chair, I mean, like I said, I'm not opposed to move or have Mr. Parks move forward, get his ducks in a row and prepare form of his petitions and all that. But I certainly think we need, and I think everyone's saying the same thing, much more public input, both active and direct contact to the municipalities that are affected by this preliminary list. And through our website or maybe emails to municipalities in general, you know, soliciting public input on suggestions that perhaps we missed from our 30,000 foot vantage point. So that at this process, when we finally do go to court, and certainly people will have the right to object or agree or whatever the case might be, but we can confidently say as a board that we've given everybody every opportunity to speak their piece, on this largest redistricting project in a half a century at least. So that's.
No, agreed. And so, Mr. Allen, just as to the extent that you indicate that you're going to make sure that people have conversations with the ward leaders, I think sharing the data that you provide us for them, the ones that's relevant to them would be particularly helpful, making sure that they have a copy of it, right, Mr. McBlain? And if there are others beyond the ward leader, Mr. McBlain, would you recommend that we include in that reach out? The party leaders have the
I'd
information.
say that I might give it to the
Yeah.
county party leaders, and it's their responsibility to go
Right,
out.
that's,
to
I
their
think that's what
own
Mr. Allen's
folks,
primarily,
but also to, even though the party leaders, it's the municipalities themselves. I mean, those
okay,
borough council people, township
That's-
commissioners are the ones that are locally elected to look out for their residents for this sort of thing. And so to contact the towns themselves, I think.
I think, Mr. McLean, similarly, you were saying, put it on the county party leaders to disperse it down the ladder. Each municipality, we have a relationship with a person there who verifies the offices that are up for election. In Upper Darby, it's our municipal clerk. I think whoever our official point of contact is with every jurisdiction, we should reach out to and let them disseminate it, or.
We can certainly include the municipal clerks. I would not want to put upon, though, a responsibility that is not required under the law. I don't want to offend any of our municipal clerks by presuming that they should be the disseminators of this information. I think it's upon us to use the list that we have and mail those out.
the township council, the step up from the particular,
I would send it to, my
Yeah.
viewpoint would be, I'd send it to all the local elected officials. I
Okay.
mean, for,
that's an easy list. I mean, we know it.
yeah, I mean, I know the county has it. I mean, it's really an email list that, I mean, somebody's got it.
I've already asked for it and received it.
Oh, great. All right. Well, there you go. So you're ahead of us. You're just waiting to tell us that you're ahead of.
No.
All right, then I want to configure what I said about the motion. So what about this? Well, let me ask one more question because this is critical. Timing. Okay, we don't always have a board meeting in August. Mr. Allen, just thinking through, if we are only, let me read the proposed motion. Motion to proceed with the preparations for the redistricting process, including precinct consolidations and realignments, and the preparation of documents for legal proceedings related thereto. But that is not the trigger event that leads to the actual filing. When do the filings reasonably, Mr. Solicitor, Mr. Allen, like when do they need to be made, even if we then end up pulling any? I know we can do that before we go to the hearing, but when do they need to be made?
Well, you can refer to the third page of the memorandum I circulated
I,
yesterday.
my printer at home is not working right. I don't have,
And
Mr.
that's-
McBlain has all this printed stuff and Mr. Alberts and I are sitting here. I've read it all, every word of every document. So
That's a sample timeline to give
yes,
everybody.
well, can you remind me, please, sir, of the sample time?
And by way of example, should a petition be filed with the court on August 1? Because of the timeline and the way that the statutory provisions work and the various periods that waiting periods exist, and when you refer the matter to the Department of State for the 30-day review phase and so forth, that would complete redistricting such that voter cards could be sent out to voters by approximately October 1. So August 1 is October 1.
Okay.
How much beyond that this board wants to go before we get too close to the 2023 general election is a matter for, for Mr. Allen.
Right, the idea was to socialize the new polling place with people this year.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But what, our assessment of, and this is noted as an aggressive timeline, but our assessment is if we were to file on August 1, we would not be sending voters their registration cards until October 1. So if we're talking about pushing this back beyond that, I think that you're starting to look at, later in October, and that starts to become a challenge in terms of.
Where would be a good point to meet? Let's say we notice the petition, notices go out. Ultimately, the conversations are had that have been discussed, the information is disseminated, it's been made public. when would be the right point to say we want to pull back these 5 and not proceed on them?
Well, I think we can always file an amended petition.
But when's the right point, sort of in terms of not making a last minute going, stressor for,
Well, this schedule assumes a final hearing date. If we file on August 1 of August 22, obviously that is totally a matter for the court to tell
Sure.
us. But I would think that you would want to have withdrawal, I'm sure could withdraw right up to the date of the hearing and during the hearing, but probably would be best to do that at least, I would say at least 48 hours before the hearing, if you could, just as a courtesy to the court, as a courtesy to any opponents who had to schedule to be at the hearing, and then, would be better for their schedules if it turns out that that proposal was going to be withdrawn, that they didn't have to take a day off from work or whatever the case might be to appear at a hearing where the matter's not going to go forward on that particular consolidation that they object to. So, I mean, I think a 48-hour period before whatever hearing date's a reasonable courtesy, not legally necessary, but.
no, I mean, I think you can appreciate that even lawyers want to be courteous to the courts and to the public. I know you might not, everybody might not believe it, but I was thinking more like do we have like an August 15th meeting to validate where we're at or something like that?
I mean, are we gonna accomplish all this public outreach by August the 15th?
I think a lot of it's
3 weeks away.
been,
And,
has
I
a
mean,
lot been, no, I mean, I'm relying on, I think that some of these conversations have been ongoing, for example, in Nether, but
Okay, go ahead.
And is our goal to implement this in the general 2023? I mean,
That timeline I provided you assumes that that would be for implementation in the general election of 2020.
it's not required. It's only simply to have people not going to new polling places into presidential. You can imagine that there will be people saying they did this to confuse me, even though in a primary, you're voting for, your own party. I could see that could be a hue and cry of some people.
Well, if it is the desire of the board to have much more public outreach before we do any kind of court filings, as opposed to doing that simultaneously, I understand that. And then the other alternative is to begin this process, but with the goal of teeing it up immediately following the certification of this fall's election. We won't realize the cost savings, and we'll still have the burdens of preparation of all the equipment and recruiting and training of all these poll workers one last time. But then you could incorporate the public notice into election day itself for the voters who are most likely to be voting in person. So whether it's in the same polling place where 2 precincts already vote, or neighboring polling places where 2 precincts currently vote, then you could have the advantage of handing out information about potential consolidation on election day itself, and have even greater outreach than we could imagine.
I mean, this has been an important project to you too. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is. I do think that people having them done in a non-presidential election year is helpful, but I understand that is a little bit quick, although I feel like this in some ways been happening. These conversations have been happening for years. But go ahead, Mr. Alvarez.
I guess I would also be reluctant to roll it out in a presidential year if it could be avoided. I do want to get, good public participation and comment. What would be the plan to accomplish the public comment and participation part of it if we were to try to do this by August 15th? Would you be able to disseminate this information to stakeholders this week?
Yes, we can disseminate information to the stakeholders this week, but reflecting on Mr. McBlain's thoughts, how many people right now might be on vacation or might be, taking time off from their normal home and being at a summer place or something like that, and might miss that. I share the concerns Mr. McBlain has expressed, and I want to do this right. Uh,
Well, the
And
good
I
news is-
don't think it would be, especially, where we have two precincts already voting
Exactly.
in the same
That's a huge number
location.
of them.
We're not talking about a change that's going to, disenfranchise a voter suddenly. So part of me, if you want to add that limitation that we only address the ones that are the lowest hanging fruit, if you will, the easiest ones to combine. Perhaps that's the best way. Then we're reducing the number of individuals that we need to do outreach to, ward leaders, what have you.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but also, I mean, I admittedly, I have come from like a municipal law background. I mean, like, for instance, Norwood Borough. There's 6 precincts now. The proposal is reduced it to 3. They had their municipal meeting last night. So before August the 15th, their council won't meet.
Right.
If they get notice of this or, that's, I'm kind of thinking out loud and in terms of, I envision this being something that was going to be a 2024 implementation, and I appreciate and I understand very much, not wanting to, in a presidential year, not wanting to, make any ripples, but also my thought process was, well, you implement it for the primary, that gives people, there's going to be some confusion in some places, gives them the primary election to sort of figure it out. And in general, everything has now gone through one skip. Here, people voted in the primary. This fall's election is just as important or more important to some people,
In terms of local impact.
to say, hey, I just voted in the primary election here, and now I'm in a different place, even though it's, it's there. And then you're going to have the whole issue of the boards. I mean, so you're eliminating,
There are conversations that are going to have happen with the boards because there will be 2 judges in some places and, 58%.
Fortunately, not too many.
And several of these
It's
precincts are.
it's a smaller number than I expected.
Still, they exist.
It will have a few, we will have a few.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I want us all to be, I mean, this is the most important project we're undertaking right now and in the foreseeable future, and it's really important to all of us. Well, at least it's a primary in 2024, right? I mean, people are voting for their own party. So I think that that's important to recognize because there's not a confusion that can be targeted at. You're trying to get me to have my candidate, my party lose, right? That's where people will be. So if we do this and put it on a longer time frame so that people have the fall and the municipal meetings and we're really now targeting the primary for when it actually takes place. And then I like the idea of noticing people. I don't know if we need to only notice ones that are staying. We could put a notice at all the potentially affected polling precincts, just to let people know, right, that this is happening. And then, of course, if any changes that are made, the voter registration will send them a new card. And that might happen in a weird time, right? Because if we get this all through, let's say in December, it might go out in January. I believe there are timeframes for issuing the new voter cards. I think it's like 30 days. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And then could we do another reminder to those affected precincts by mail, just a general mailing that says this is the changes that have been made. And, maybe it says the same thing for all of it, but you are one of the people who is potentially affected. Please read this. To reinforce the need to make sure that they're aware of that change, something like that. So
Yeah.
adding it, it's a burden though, administratively, it's a, but is that something we think we could do?
Yes, I think that would be something that we could do. And on a personal level, administrative level, I'd prefer something that we're actually handing to the voter as opposed to a sign, because
Sure.
my experience is that signs in the polling place are highly ineffective ways to communicate with voters. If that were the case, we would eliminate double votes and overvotes and undervotes.
Cell phones. We've
Yeah,
eliminated a lot.
a lot of issues if the signs worked as well as some people wish they did. So that is one opportunity to take this to an even greater, level of transparency, or even broader level of transparency.
What do you think, Mr. Albers?
I think that's a reasonable approach. I mean, I think it's very important that we get buy-in from the community. I think it's important that we have consensus on this board, as long as we can handle it operationally.
Right.
And I agree, it won't be too disruptive in the primary. I think that's fine.
So there's 3 outreaches, Mr. Allen, one of which you're required by law to do, but the other 2 are voluntary. Are you, you do think, it sounds like I hear you saying you think that that can be done. You have a great team, we know, but there's a lot going on, especially when we get closer to the presidential primary. Think we can do it?
Yes.
Mr. McLean, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll then prepare, but we'll have another meeting in September to,
Yeah, I mean, I would
See
be
where we're at?
opposed to having a meeting of the board, a special meeting of the board, even perhaps at night, just on this topic.
sure.
To receive public input or, I'm just thinking at night, it might allow municipal leaders, to come and talk to us. I mean, that's.
We just have to make sure we don't conflict with any of their meetings.
Well, yeah,
Is that the same night as 5 of their meetings?
we'll find some 5th Monday of the month in the fall, and nobody meets. But I mean, just to have it, take that type of step to make it available to, all the municipal leaders to come in and tell us why we're right or why we're wrong or what else we should be doing.
And we will probably need a regular meeting in September anyway. Mr. Allen, now that's an additional burden. Could we arrange a special meeting though? I think I get only on this topic in September, I guess, or it could even be October. At that point, it doesn't, when you're ready, when we're all ready.
Yeah, there's sort of a moment right now where if we act very quickly, we could do this for the general, in theory at least, and with the cooperation of the court and so forth, we could do this for the general. If, once we get beyond a couple weeks from now, I think that window closes effectively, and we are going to have to be looking at the spring of 2024.
Right. The only problem is that, of course, we have the preparations for the general. So what would be the best timing under those circumstances? Is it, January? Is it December? Or is it, do you think we could do it in November or October and not interfere?
Well, anybody watching this meeting knows that we haven't, had secret meetings on this beforehand. And, I mean, I'd prefer, if that's the case, that we try to do something at the end of August. Put this list out there for the public to see, with the understanding that this is not going to take effect for this fall. And we'll get the temperature of the room in a hurry, if that's what we're looking to do. And, to use your example, Norwood, if they're, I think there are arguments to be made, because there are basically like 3 polling places that are in use there. So it's not going to be some kind of radical departure.
Although, I mean, this is the first and Labor Day week that I'm not going away, so I don't have a problem, and then the first week in September is back to school night I may be the only one on the board, but there's plenty of people I'm sure who have to deal with back to school night. But I do think maybe if we're going to do it at the end of August, it should probably be, is the beginning of September after Labor Day, because just people go, that's the last hurrah for people.
The beginning of September would also work too. As long as we're not getting into when we have to start doing
Right.
UOCAVA
Yeah.
ballots and everything else, and logic and accuracy and classes for poll workers, all that other activity.
I mean, I would think that, we have all our ducks in a row and, all the public input that we could get and have a final list. And then sometime in that early fall, September, whatever, submit the petition. And you've got plenty of time to, have it heard even after the election takes place. And, presumably the, court approval and then the implementation process, you've got 4 months, presumably they don't change the date of the primary. I mean,
It would still put us in a good place to consolidate whichever ones we wanted to in late November, early December, ahead of whenever, like you said, they're going to set the primary for next year, whether that's March or April.
And that's why I would want to do a reminder closer to the election, because those voter cards will go out in the middle of the winter. Yeah, okay. So early September?
Okay.
Okay, special meeting. everybody here is now aware of that. All right. So then the motion is to proceed with do we need to move to proceed? I mean, we've already started this process. It's continuing.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be necessary because there's no specific action. You know, the idea of the motion would be to
Start filing.
basically, if we were going to be preparing and filing the action in the very near future, we would need a vote from the board to authorize us to do that. But since there's not an impending filing under the way this is shaken out, I don't think there's a need for a motion particularly, and we can certainly continue to we stand ready to have things, prepared for a filing, but really the point of the motion was to authorize the
Yeah.
filing.
I
We can
understand.
always prepare papers in the ordinary course without a motion to do so. As long as we have general direction from Mr. Allen, or typically I would work with the chair of the board for things like, should I go ahead and start preparing papers?
Right.
I think
I think you have a broad endorsement to start appropriately so that we're ready to go when we're ready. Okay. Well, and I think there's been great transparency here. So let's go to the next item for transparency, Mr. Allen.
This is an item that, because you and I had discussed,
Not voting on it, but
Right.
and to the extent that we want to have transparency, how can we approach your recommendations you mentioned in the earlier comments for 9? Are we not quite ready for that production?
we can take the initial steps the same initial steps that we were discussing for the precinct consolidations and start mailing out to all elected officials in the 9 affected communities. What our plan is and why, and allow them to provide us with feedback before we present this for a vote.
And can we put that on our website, proposals for Dropbox consolidations? Okay.
Yes.
Everybody all right about that? Any questions for Mr. Allen? Okay. All right, and then the capital improvement approval update, please.
So I'm pleased to report to the board that the county capital improvement plan is going to allow for an expansion of the electronic poll book program for this fall, so that we will be able to cover roughly a third of the precincts. As we had discussed a couple of months ago and a month ago, we had the pilot program. It was highly successful. I would remind the public that the electronic poll books serve a variety of very positive functions in that, instead of just a phone book where our poll workers struggle to find the name of that voter and sometimes miss it, even when it's alphabetically listed, there's the whole list of 400,000 voters, so that when people show up at the wrong polling place, it immediately tells the poll worker where to redirect that voter. There's no phone call needed. It'll actually print out a ticket and you can move the voter along the way. In locations where there are multiple precincts, it proved extremely valuable in that you didn't have to bounce between, if you didn't know which precinct was yours in that gymnasium, if there were 4 precincts there, you went to any one of the poll books and it would check you in, and also the poll worker would be able to tell you, you're going to the southwest corner, you're going to the northeast corner, you're going to the northwest corner, whatever, and direct the person to the right precinct. So it speeds up check-in, which is that's the biggest choke points that you have are voter check-in, and then are there enough booths in that polling place? And the booths we can solve as long as we get a large enough polling place. But the check-in process, if we're dealing with 1970s technology of giant phone books, and people who no longer use phone books. I mean, I remember being able to look up numbers. It's a reflection of my age. Now everybody, I can't even remember anybody other than my wife's phone number. That's about it. But anyway, these books are archaic. We will have, in addition to voter services, you'll have consistent instructions. That was one of the things that the poll workers loved, even the ones who are technophobes. They really enjoyed it. You have consistent instructions. You didn't have to rely upon what you remember, you think you remember, you heard at a training 3 weeks ago on a Saturday morning, when you were kind of groggy. The instructions are consistent from precinct to precinct, the more you get the electronic poll books. And lastly, they're also beneficial for transparency in that during the middle of the day, a poll watcher can ask for a printout of all the voters they don't have to sit there with the numbered list and go through and copy down a list. They can actually, the poll workers can actually print out a list of everybody who's shown up so far that day. And lastly, in terms of voter history, Pennsylvania as a whole, voter history is not known until weeks after certification. So you don't know, where the provenance of those 200,000 votes that were cast on election day that were certified at the end of November until perhaps the middle of December. Whereas the electronic poll books allow us to capture and log and make available to the public the voter history, not only that day in the precinct, but also within a week after election day. Assuming that we could do it even sooner, but if we're focused on processing the provisional ballots, we may wait until a week after election day to pull all that data and upload it to the state and have the voter history done. Right now, they have to take those phone books, and this is very prone to error, and they have to take those phone books and go through page by page and look for which items were signed by the voter on election day, and then scan the barcode. And hopefully not scan the barcode from the next line accidentally, which we've seen happen, or miss one of the signatures on that page, which we've seen happen. This captures all of the voter history and does so quite effectively. So that is why we're excited that we're going to be able to move ahead with a third of the precincts this fall. And then with the goal of getting the second third of the precincts in the primary. And finally, that way we'll have had enough training and everything to implement in the full county for the fall of 2024. That's a very conservative, measured rollout of this technology, and it'll allow us to focus on initially the precincts where it can do the most good, and that's the precincts that have multiple, or the polling places rather, that have multiple precincts in the same location, such as the Chester High School.
I was about to say it, Chester High School, if that needs to be on that first third list.
It will
I mean,
be.
there's 4 polling places in a long hallway. It'll facilitate for voters greatly, I think. So that I do think that's great news. Okay, so your intention is to focus, because that was going to be my question on for the first third on multi precinct locations.
Yes.
Mr. McLean, do you have any questions?
I support the use of technology. I was very impressed. I was at Upper Darby High School, and I think it's there. What type of RFP process for procurement, or is that us? Is that the county council?
The vendor already is with the Co-Stars program, with the state, with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So there already is pricing. This is also the same vendor that is developing, and I think this is vital, the new Sure system, which will unfortunately not replace the current Sure system until after 2024. But it is this is the same company that is developing the new replacement Sure system that we're hoping is implemented in 2025. So the not only the design of the product and the success that we had with the pilot program, and the fact that they've got pricing with Co-Stars, the fact that we're going to be able to have a vendor that dovetails with the vendor that's already working with the Department of State very effectively, I think is ways in using this vendor.
Okay, but and the fact that they have pricing on Co-Stars, eliminates sort of the need to, bid that pricing. But are we looking at all at any other vendors? And I only say that because when I sat in that chair, I had spears and arrows thrown at me when we had a sole source contract for millions of dollars.
I understand the concerns you're raising. There is, well, go ahead. I mean, I think what Mr. Allen, how is it priced out with for us, just through the CoStarz program? I mean, the state had already contracted with them for this Sure system, which was a huge part of the presentation to us, was that efficiency. And I thought that there were also pricing efficiencies, but I understand that the.
And that may be
One
the best
bid.
choice.
Right.
And the fact that they're,
Did anybody else, has anybody else had the opportunity to present?
No, not at this time.
just take a look at it.
Okay, I agree.
I-
Are you gonna throw a spear? Now that you get the chance.
No, button spears.
All right, let's. Mr. Allen and I will talk about that a little more offline and Mr. Solicitor, if you could just we'll keep you in the conversation.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, Solicitor report, there are litigation updates, I believe.
The one notable litigation update is there was a proceeding initiated against the county and against Mr. Allen, but that related to the board with respect to providing access to voter information. The demand was made that the election records in question be produced on an unredacted basis. In other words, without certain personal identifiable information disclosed to the reviewer. There was the person who made that demand made it through a right to know act request to the county, and then initiated litigation against the county, not against the board per se. In the Commonwealth Court, we were engaged, my firm was engaged to represent the county in connection with that because it overlapped significantly with the Board of Elections activities. And we took the position in that proceeding that the Commonwealth Court was not appropriate court for that matter, that there wasn't subject matter jurisdiction before the Commonwealth Court. As people may generally know, courts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and elsewhere, including in the federal government, are courts of limited jurisdiction. They only can hear certain cases under certain circumstances. And our position was that this was a dispute that didn't belong in front of the Commonwealth Court. The Commonwealth Court agreed with our analysis on that and dismissed the nominally added Secretary of the Commonwealth, who had been named as a party, but no relief was being sought against the Secretary of the Commonwealth. It was a bit of an artifice to try to justify jurisdiction in the Commonwealth Court. The court saw through it, dismissed the Secretary of the Commonwealth from that matter, and then referred the matter back to the Court of Common Pleas of Delaware County. In the meantime, the person seeking the information filed an administrative appeal regarding the redaction question, and a hearing officer who hears such administrative appeals. And by the way, we also argued in the Commonwealth Court that the petitioner had failed to exhaust administrative remedies by proceeding to court without going through the administrative appeal process. As if to prove our point, in the meantime, the petitioner did then pursue an administrative appeal and prevailed on the administrative appeal. The administrative appeal hearing officer determined that the records could be produced without redactions. And so within 24 hours of that ruling, we contacted the requester and indicated that the materials would be made available. And at this point, they've been reviewed. So I'm not sure where things will proceed from here on that, but there technically is a matter pending against the county and certain other county-related defendants in the Court of Common Pleas of Delaware County, although whether that's now been rendered moot based on the materials having been produced, we will see. And to those who are concerned about personal identifiable information, obviously, if we're taking the position that we're going to require a order from an administrative hearing officer or a court before we're providing that information to a public requester, you can rest assured that we are doing our job to protect personal identifiable information of the voters of this county.
I just want to pause and say thank you, Mr. Allen, to your team for making those materials available. I think it was a big effort by a good number of people on your team to make
There
it.
was tens of thousands of records.
Exactly. So it's a pretty impressive effort, and to be able to do so once that hearing officer decides so quickly and efficiently and effectively is impressive, but unsurprising given how great our team is, but thank you.
And I do want to be clear, we're not trying to hide information from the public, but you can hear from the speakers here and the public comment that people care that their personally identifiable information is protected by this board. And of course, it's a situation where if you protect it, there are going to be people who claim that you're hiding information because you're protecting it. And if you don't protect it, there'll be people saying, how come you let that come out? That's ridiculous. That's my, that's something secret to me, or that's something you should protect more. So that's a balance that we try to strike between, providing what's appropriate under the law and protecting people's personal identifiable information. The hearing officer determined that the balance fell in a different way. That's the way the process works. But we did go through that process in order to make sure that people's information does remain protected when it's appropriate.
Thank
So that's an update on that matter. There are a number of other pending matters. There aren't notable reports in them at this point. The other item on my report list relates to rules for candidates as poll watchers. Mr. Allen and I wanted to address this because I think there's some confusion about what the board's position is on this and what the rules are. Our position is that a candidate may not be a poll watcher in any precinct where their name appears on the ballot. That's been the policy as I've interpreted it since I took this job in January of 2020. That is not a change from January of 2020, at least. Whether folks have been honoring that or not, I can't speak to, but anytime any issue has come to my attention about clarification, that's been the consistent policy that I've enforced.
Well, we've clearly trained on it because there was a public incident on the news in which the front poll workers was well aware of that policy.
Right. That has been our, as best I'm aware, that's been what we've been training poll workers to follow. And the reason is quite simple. A candidate sitting in the polling place, smiling or winking and nodding or any of those other things at voters, even the mere presence and a glance has an effect of being like electioneering, and electioneering is strictly prohibited in a polling place. If the candidate wants to do that, they can simply be outside and greet voters when they arrive. But there is a certain message that gets sent when the candidate is inside the room in the polling place where the voter is handed the ballot, and that candidate looks at that voter. And by the way, this is probably more of an issue in a primary than in a general election. But nevertheless, it's, something that we want to be mindful of in all elections. But that sort of inside access, hey, I'm in the room and I'm watching you as you take your ballot and you better do the right thing, is the message. And it's not, and to me, that's chilling. To me, that's electioneering. And it's very simple. Just have your friend who's registered voter in that precinct be the poll watcher for you, and you go out front and glad hand the candidates. I've been a candidate many years ago. I know how the process works. And I think that's totally appropriate, and it's not an infringement on a candidate whatsoever.
Now, Ms. Guy talked about the count itself. Can we
Right.
talk about that?
So on that point, our policy has been, and this goes all the way back to the early 2000s, a candidate does not need a poll watcher certificate to enter the polling place at the close of the polls and to observe the count. That's been the rule as far as I've ever been aware. So you do not need, as a candidate, a poll watcher certificate to enter the polling place at the close of the polls. You're not in there while people are voting, but once people are done voting and the polls are closed and the count begins, the candidate in our policy is entitled to go into that polling place and observe the count. Not interfere with the count, not disrupt the count, not take all the materials and run out, but to observe the count. A candidate is entitled to do that. Because at that point, the electioneering concern no longer exists because people are not voting at that point.
And we are lucky that we happen to have somebody who may have been part of the earlier periods that you've talked about. I mean, Mr. McLean, is this consistent with where you believed our policy to be?
I was trying to remember when this issue came up, I have to admit, I believe I've been a candidate in the past, and I believe I've had a poll watcher certificate.
Well, we don't prohibit candidates from getting poll watcher certificates.
Yeah,
The candidate who would get a poll watcher certificate and not be able to use it would be a candidate who's on the ballot countywide or more statewide or countywide. Because at that point, that poll watcher certificate, there's not going to be a precinct anywhere in the county where your name's not on the ballot. But if you're a candidate for in a municipality for a municipal seat, and there'll be a lot of this coming up in the general election this fall, and you want to be a poll watcher for another candidate who's a friend of yours in the neighboring municipality, you can go over there if your name's not on the ballot and be a poll watcher for that person there.
well, how about I take the relieve you of that inquiry and just say this. The reason it's on the agenda as a potential action item is so that we can be clear as to what we do have our expectations going into the general election.
Is it statutory that a candidate can't be a?
There is no,
Or is it just, and I heard your explanation, and I mean, I think that's a policy, I mean, I. get
It
some
is, and
people may
that's-
interpret
so-
the candidate being in the polling place as electioneering. I mean, I don't know that I get to that conclusion, but it's a fair, it can be a fair point for discussion or debate, but I'm just talking about the election code. Does the election
Right.
code anywhere say a candidate may not be a poll watcher in any place where they are listed on the ballot?
that is not specifically stated in those terms in the election code. My position is it's an absolutely reasonable inference from the prohibition against electioneering inside the polling place. And it doesn't say a candidate is entitled to be a poll watcher in a polling place where they're on the ballot either. And in fact, the language of the codes that talks about a candidate appointing poll watchers sort of seems like pretty clear that they're talking about person A appointing person B, C, and D, not person A appointing themselves.
I think it's addressed separately. I thought there was language in there about it doesn't say about poll watching. It says about entering the polling place during the course while the election is open. So they can't, except for, I think it says you can't enter the polling place in which you appear on the ballot except to cast your vote.
That it does say that, absolutely.
Rule out any possibility of being a poll watcher if you're statutorily barred from entering the polling place where your name appears. But then
So that like I'm
also are
saying,
statutorily granted the access after the polls close. So that's why we don't require a certificate to observe the count, because that's a statutory right you have as a candidate. But entering the polling place while the election is being conducted, apart to cast your own vote, that in itself, you're violating the law. So how could we grant someone a watcher certificate and then allow them to use it to violate the law?
right, I do think the counter argument would be, if I'm imagining the other side, would be, well, it doesn't say we have to read provisions consistent with one another, and you could argue that the poll watcher provision doesn't specifically prohibit it, and so you could read. But my view is the better interpretation, and this is a lot of what we do in the law, as many folks who are lawyers recognize or who work with lawyers understand, is it's almost impossible to write a statute that deals with every conceivable scenario, or to write a contract for that matter that deals with every conceivable scenario. So what you attempt to do is look at what is there in writing and make a reasonable inference for what is the intention of the legislature to deal with this circumstance that they don't specifically address one way or the other. And here, I think the fair and best interpretation of all of the provisions, as you mentioned, the ones I cited, the ones you cited, is that candidates shouldn't be in polling places other than to cast their own vote during the time that and that extends to them being poll watchers. And then the reasonable limitation is if they want to be a poll watcher where they're not on the ballot, then the concerns about electioneering on behalf of themselves go away. They obviously can't electioneer as poll watchers on behalf of someone else either. But I remember in 2008, there were concerns about people, whether it was electioneering in a polling place for a voter to wear a shirt reflecting the candidate of their preference. Now, that's all been sorted out since then. But if an image on a voter's shirt could be considered electioneering, then certainly a candidate in the flesh sitting inside the polling place is more impressive than an image on a shirt of a voter.
And I think, I mean, we can talk about active versus passive electioneering, and I think voters have a right to kind of just go in wearing what they wear to a certain extent, as long as they're not out in there campaigning.
Right.
But as to your
That's
point
where it's,
about
that's where the clothing
you're a
issue's been
candidate-
resolved, by the way, is the voters are, it's a First Amendment right. They can go in there.
when
and
you're a
vote, sure.
candidate sitting inside a polling place, as you say, just by virtue of your presence, and certainly these are often community leaders with a lot of respect. They carry a lot of moral weight with people. They can be intimidating. This is a complaint we receive often about the intimidating presence of an elected official or candidate in the polling place, sometimes bringing in snacks for the poll workers, sometimes coming in to get, I witnessed both. I saw someone come in and in totally good faith, trying to just bring water bottles and stuff to, you know, make sure the poll workers are well fed and watered throughout the day. And then conversely, candidates going inside to get a bottle of water because it's a hot day. And both situations, if you're a voter who doesn't understand the nuances of that, you just see that, oh, look, they're all in cahoots. I have no faith in this process because the person who's on the ballot is feeding and being fed by the people working the tables who are supposed to be the fair arbiter. So was anything wrong happening in either case? Like fundamentally, no. But did it present the appearance of impropriety? Yes, which is why I think they draw this hard line to prevent that, you know, because how would you police that? Do we have to station constables in every polling place to make sure elected officials aren't crossing the line between just being there and then actively electioneering?
Well, and
That would be
raises the
an
question,
unreasonable burden.
who's policing the police too, right? I
Right.
mean, do you have judges of election and election boards, but those election boards in some instances are not fully formed out in some parts of our county. There are areas where one party, the other is dramatically underrepresented. And if you have an elected official and someone from that same party is the judge of elections and the majority inspector, and there's not a minority inspector, or a minority inspector of that same party was written in an election, which is possible. This whole thing
No,
starts to have the
witnessed
optics
it.
that are
You
very
talked about people from other parts of the county going in and serving, and we appreciate them. But in one instance, there were multiple precincts where no one on the board knew that the person was not only elected official, but had been elected for a long period of time. I was a little disappointed that that wasn't, you know, something that they were aware of, but I've witnessed it. I've been on a candidate. I've been worked the polls many years. I've sat on this board. I've seen donuts delivered from a state rep, and we put them in the back room. And it says for the workers, you know, the state rep, it was before I was on the board, but we don't have them out where the voters would see that the donut that was being delivered, it was for the poll workers. All of those things have happened. I mean, I firmly fall on the side of your interpretation. I think the mere presence of a candidate while voters are voting on whether or not to vote for that candidate is passive, we'll call it electioneering, has the potential for that enough, given the influence, given you go to Alden, everybody knows you, right? I mean, there's communities, the whole goal is to have communities come together around voting and encouraging that. And I don't want anything that could sort of discourage at any level a voter from doing that. So, but on top of that, you've supported it, I think, with your argument for me. Mr. McBlain, I don't know where you fall on this, but I do think we need to vote on it, because I think what we don't want to have happen is it be a policy that Mr. Allen is responsible for. I feel like this is under the guidance of the Board of Elections.
I would just also emphasize another point. I mentioned it in passing, but there is no meaningful burden on a candidate to this policy. They can simply appoint a poll watcher to be in that polling place and be their eyes and ears. That's the system contemplated by the election code. They don't have to be themselves the eyes and ears for the election day.
Right.
And once the polls close, then they can be their own eyes and ears and go in there without a certificate under the rules. So there is no meaningful burden, and there is a significant benefit. So if you're trying to weigh burden and benefit here, I think the balance is very clear.
Falls on the voter to be protected from the potential discouragement. You don't have to comment. We could just vote, but I do think we should vote. I do think, in fairness to Mr. Allen, I mean, I don't know, Mr. Solicitor, what you think, but I don't think it should be the burden of Mr. Allen's department to come up with this type of policy that could have be challenged.
I think there is good reason to have this board formally adopt this policy.
I think it should be the board adopting it, because it is a policy interpretation. And I would support it because again, I don't think it really matters one way or the other. Like I said, I've been in Canada, I've been an elected official. I've walked into the
Right.
polling places, to say hello to everybody and thank you. And, you know, I think it's particularly ineffective as a candidate to be sitting in the polling place, not being able to talk to anybody. I don't think that's the most effective, you know, use of your resources. I'd rather be outside where I can openly electioneer, you know, and talk to folks. So, I mean, to make the rule perfectly clear, I'm not opposed to saying that, you know, that's the interpretation. I think the statutory language that Mr. Albert, you know, talked about probably makes it more clear that if somebody's not allowed to enter into there. Now, a side question I had is, you said that the candidate can come in after the poll is closed. Can anybody else come in?
Well, appointed watchers can be in there.
I mean, let's say the candidate has their wife or husband with them. Can those people come in?
Technically, no. Unless they're
Candidate.
appointed watchers, but yeah, just a family relation. If the candidate wanted a lawyer in there that was identified as the candidate's lawyer, then I think that would be something I'd have to look more carefully at, because there are provisions that generally allow the candidate and their counsel to be present at certain events that are related to elections. So that would be something I'd have to look at more carefully, but just generally sort of, and I will say, look, the rules are the rules and we want to enforce them. But if a candidate wants to have their 7-year-old come in there and watch this process of democracy, if that's copacetic for everybody there and the judge of elections concludes that's appropriate and there's not a dispute about it, I don't think that's an issue to, you know, stand on the
That's at the
ceremony
discretion of the
about.
Joe.
That's normally how that plays out. Yeah.
Too.
And they're also allowed to be there.
But I wouldn't
Prior
turn it
to
into a
opening.
family reunion because that could be disruptive, right? So you have to be sensible about these things, I would say.
Are they also, fresh from memory, are candidates also by right allowed to be there to observe the opening of the machine?
Our practice has been the candidates have been allowed to be there in the beginning of the day before the polls open, yes. I don't think the code speaks directly to that, but our practice has been to permit that.
Seems reasonable.
All right, so we need to word what the motion to adopt the policy that is consistent with, you go ahead.
I would just say the motion to consider would be a motion to formally adopt the board's, the policy that a candidate cannot serve as a poll watcher in any precinct where that candidate appears on the ballot. And I would extend it to candidates who are not on the ballot, who are organizing a formal write-in campaign too.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. That motion passes. Thank you. All right, Ms. Jackson, you've been very patient.
Morning.
So,
I do have a few waivers this morning, but I would just like to point out that part of campaign finance is to monitor reports for timeliness and to assess fees when necessary. So for this year, we have a total of 55 candidates that are currently reporting. We have 221 committees that are reporting and a possible 10 different filing cycles. So from January to June of this year, we've collected a total of $6,240.75 in campaign finance fees. So with that being said, we do have a few waivers. There are 5 that I can recommend for the fees to be waived, and 1 I would leave to your discretion. The first one is candidate Colin Irving. He's a first-time filer, and he's asking for permission to waive his fee. The second is Ridley Democratic Committee. They had extenuating circumstances of why they filed late. We have Nicholas Jones, who was a first-time filer, William Bolton, who was also a first-time filer, and Doug Stillman. The other candidate is Edward Kelly.
He previously received a waiver or on our last meeting on June 27th. And he also filed a cycle 3 late for this filing cycle. He's also asking for a waiver of this for these fines also. So the first waiver was approved for $250. That was waived, and now his fine is $150, and he's asking for another waiver.
Ms. Jackson, I did read them before
Mhm.
this meeting, but just I didn't catch that nuance that he was not a first time. What was the, can you just describe the basis for the second
Yeah,
violation?
So Edward Kelly actually has someone else filing on his behalf. He has a lawyer. I believe his name is Michael Pupio. And he said that he was not aware of the following requirements. Initially, he thought that he signed the bottom of the petition form when he initially filed his running for candidacy. And then when he was made aware that he still had to file, he just said that he filed late twice.
But it's a late, not a no file.
Yes, it's late. It's too late.
Is Mr. Pupio now aware of the?
Yes,
filing?
he is aware. He tried to terminate, but at this point, he cannot terminate his candidate
Right.
filing because,
I saw
right,
that.
because he
That's-
won, right,
That's because he's not the candidate.
exactly,
Right.
right. So that's the one I leave to your.
Right, but that's the circumstance that makes it a little different. He doesn't want to continue to have that obligation, but can't
Right,
remove the obligation at this.
exactly. Yeah, so the current fee is $150.
I mean, now I'm inclined to say that he did explicitly write that he would like to terminate it. And then I saw, that was your note, I assume, that
Yes.
says you can't do
Oh,
that
yes.
under those circumstances.
Was that
Mhm.
clearly communicated to him
Yes, it
before the
was.
deadline that he
Yes, it
recently missed?
Yes, yes, I communicated that to Michael Pupio and not Edward Kelly himself. I have not spoken directly with the candidate. So I'm not sure if the candidate understands that he has to continue to file.
But Mr.
I would
Pupio-
note that when a person retains a lawyer, the lawyer is that person's legal agent for
Right.
communications involving the representation.
So has he already filed it or are we waiting?
Yes,
for him
the
to
cycle
file
3
it?
report was
Termination.
The cycle 3 report was due on June the 15th. It came in on June the 29th. And it was late, and the current late fee is $150 that was assessed. So Mr. Pupio was made aware that there was a late fee involved. Well, he knew that there was a late fee involved with filing his cycle 3 late. He
So-
also knew it with the cycle 2.
Right. So in order for the candidate to
Mhm.
terminate their responsibility to file the reports,
Mhm.
they would have to waive basically the $250, right?
In their initial filing?
No. When they file their petition form, at the bottom of if they sign the waiver, then they're not required to file, but they can only terminate their commitment if they lost the primary. So if he lost in June, he would have been able to terminate his report filings. But because he won, he's still required to carry it out through the end of the election year.
He can't waive that now by
No.
stating that I will.
No, I questioned Pennsylvania campaign finance law. I presented that question to them in an email, and I received the response that no, he cannot do that.
From the Department of State.
Yes, from Pennsylvania State Campaign
obvious.
Finance Department.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Has-
so
And Mr. Pupio understands that part of it.
yes, he does
So-
now. Yes, he does.
And it's his job to, as you know,
Correct.
Mr. Park, to
correct.
speak with his own client.
Yes.
When's the next report due?
The next report, I have it here, just give me a second. Is a cycle 5, and it's not due until October 27th.
So it's a little bit unusual. I'm
personally-
Well-
inclined to hold him to the October 27th deadline.
I'm inclined to, just we give people the one warning. You did communicate it to the person who is representing the individual,
Mhm.
and then he still missed that deadline after
Yeah.
he had been informed.
Two
But his
days,
client the lawyer misunderstood the requirements.
yes, but two days after it was waived, he filed another report late. So I don't know.
Well, I know Mr. Kruger is a lawyer, but was he, I know these were sent to us, but I don't recall, was he saying he is acting as his lawyer, or is he the chairman of the party? In Springfield, I mean.
He didn't specifically say he was acting as his lawyer. He just told me that he was following his reports. So I
That's a
don't,
fair point. What if we had, gave is Mr. Pupio aware that this was going to be heard before this?
yes,
meeting?
he was, yes.
And at no point have you had any direct communication with Mr. Kelly?
No, not at all.
So the fact that Mr. Kelly has not applied for this, and Mr. Kelly is the responsible party,
Mm.
we can either decide to
Right, that's
accept,
true.
to just, well, we haven't had an appeal from the person who,
Who
I mean,
should
we
be
do, in
appealing?
fact, have not
Well,
had a
that goes
valid
to the
appeal.
lawyer question.
Or he is in fact representing him. We have to decide one way or the other how we're gonna approach it.
Yeah.
Or we could inquire of Mr. Pupio, what is his relationship to the camp?
Normally candidates
And-
don't hire a lawyer to file their campaign finance reports.
Normally not.
So they hired a lawyer, I think.
I mean, I hired a lawyer to oversee everything. I didn't want anything to be, I mean, that's. like-
Normally, these municipal candidates for these small, usually unpaid or nominally paid positions, and they just sort of trust the party just handles all their stuff for them
Mhm.
and keeps them informed and guides them through the paperwork. That's been my experience, even though they are legally responsible. They do rely on that leadership and guidance from their party chairs. I know Mr. Pupio, by reputation, is an experienced party chair. I'm sure he does take care of this for all his candidates and probably quite well. He's been told, there was a warning given, a clarification given even before that second deadline missed, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So I don't really see a compelling argument to waive it. If I get outvoted, I'm not going to cry about it, but
No, I mean, I'm not trying to favor Mr. Pupio. Ms. Jackson has done everything that she could
Right.
do. And the only thing that gave me pause was that misunderstanding about the ability to determine.
yeah, it's confusing. I agree with that.
The report that he filed, was there any money raised or spent by the candidate?
No, there was not. It was a zero report, but he still would have to file it because we don't know what he files until he files it.
My view, I tend to be lenient on these things, but in my view, again, the candidate didn't raise or spend it with, there were at least a dozen or so that we've considered, so far this spring of candidates, who, did not, waive, did not sign the form, and were obligated to file it, but then didn't realize that for whatever reason.
Mhm.
We've waived it, so I would make a motion to approve all the waiver requests as presented.
On this one, I'm gonna second that. I'm leaning on this one, but I expect Mr. Pupio will work this out with the candidate in some way, and that same courtesy won't happen on October 27th. But I think that what gives me pause on this one is that confusion that Ms. Jackson did seek, have to seek clarification from the state. And I say that only because I do think when we have imposed fines, it's been more willful sort of violations, and I'm not seeing that here. Is that fair? I mean, historically.
Yeah, I believe it was willful, but he's not a first time.
He's not a first time. You could not recommend,
Exactly.
your recommendations are based on first time, and that's
Exactly.
that's our normal practice.
And that, as you say, whether it be malice or just failure to do the thing appropriately. I mean, people make mistakes. I've made mistakes with campaign finance filing and I've paid the fines and,
Right.
there have been times where it was beyond my control and I said, hey, can you? there was this thing raised-
Presumably the candidate would be the one paying the fines,
Correct.
and they've raised no money. It's a little awkward. They may have, anyway.
Well, they're not allowed to use the money they raised anyway.
Right. No. I mean, but I mean, they haven't been raising money, so they might not understand that they would. Anyway, I'm inclined to agree with this one, but, and look for that October, if it would be possible to have a specific report about what happens in October on this candidate. I assume if they fail, you will be presenting
Mhm.
a fines. So that's where I land, but I appreciate and respect it if you land differently. That's more, it's also,
I'm likely to vote against this, not because I object to any of the other recommendations, just on the principle that's.
all right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay.
Nay.
Okay. The motion carries. Thank you.
Does that include the other five also?
Yes,
Okay,
all five are,
Okay.
Mr. Alberts is not intending his vote to directly speak, but they were all grouped together in the
Okay.
motion. So
all right.
all of them have been approved, the
Thank you.
waivers. All right. Mr. Allen,
We discussed in the next meeting date, although we had tentatively set it for August 22, based on the earlier conversation. I think it'll be at the call of the board, the chair, and we'll consult with you about a date in the early part of September.
that will be the special meeting, and then we will have our normally scheduled meeting in September at the third
Yes.
Tuesday. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, is there anything else from you, Mr. Allen, or Mr. Solicitor, or anybody on the board?
Just the voter registration commission, the
Yep.
meeting that follows this.
All right, then this concludes our Board of Elections meeting, and I call to order the Delaware County Voter Registration Commission meeting of July 25th, 2023.
Perhaps we can have a 5-minute break in between the meetings. Yes.
Okay. We will sit in abeyance for 5 minutes while we actually just pull back the call. Can I pull back the call to order? I'm going to pull it back. We'll take 5 minutes. Thank you very much. that they can be aware of the one action item?
We'll be receiving public comment first, then we'll be receiving a report from Michelle Donardis, who's the Assistant Manager for Voter Registration, about the work underway based on the ERIC items that were referred to us for this summer, and the status of those projects. And then lastly, there's an action item, a resolution to endorse the Department of State's continued use of the government-led, government-managed partnership that is the Electronic Registration Information Center.
All right, with that, is there any public comment? Please.
My name is Karis Coker, 836 Concord Road, Glen Mills. With reference to the court case that Mr. Parks was referring to, the signatures on the mail-in ballot envelope is a legal declaration under penalty of perjury, and as such, it is a public legal document. And as Mr. Parks well knows, the plaintiffs in the case regarding the outer envelope and whether or not the declaration is in public domain and being not accepted in the Commonwealth Court and returned to the county courts, he knows that the cases and the petitions to that court by the plaintiffs have been repeatedly slow walked. Is this microphone on?
Yes.
Slow walked or even stonewalled here in the local Delaware County courts. And the issue of the declarations would not even have come up if Mr. Allen had allowed the candidate and watchers on the night of election, when they had a question about those envelopes, to be able to look at them as they legally were allowed to. Joy Schwartz was not able to come or to stay for the lengthy meeting, so I offered to bring a poster that she had prepared about the ERIC system, the Electronic Registration Information Center. Concerns: founded by the Pew Charitable Trust, funded by Soros Open Society Foundation, and the goals of the Open Society Foundation are contrary to the preservation of our free republic and our constitutional government. It is not a government agency. It is not bound by any legal ramifications for abuse of its content and use. Its founder, David Becker, has a history of unethical conduct and far, far left activism. It's a scam. It uses a fake address in DC. There's no building, there's no brick and mortar. It's merely an address that at a location that multiple organizations are using for their, as an address for their operations. It claims to maintain voter rolls, but it actually swells them rather than maintaining what is there. For example, in Wisconsin only has 4 million legal registered voters, but the ERIC system showed 7 million possible voters. And that's not the only state where the voter rolls are inflated far beyond the eligible voters in those states. It shares vast personal information from member states with CEIR, a key player in the Zuckerbuck scandal. So yes, I'm strongly opposed, and I hope you will.
Thank you.
Can I ask a couple questions, Madam Chair? I just have a couple, if Ms. Coker will allow, a couple follow-up questions, because I'll talk about it. I have done a lot of research and looked at it, and a couple things that you just brought up, I want to clarify because I haven't not even found it. Mr.
You can answer if you want. You don't have to.
Yeah, you don't have to, but
you're
you
indulged.
said Mr. Becker has been found to have engaged in a lot of unethical behavior. What type of unethical behavior, and where is that, and when was that?
I do not have the details at the moment, but I'll be glad to get those to you.
Okay, and the part about, I have found where Pew Charitable Trusts made an initial grant, and Pew's obviously well-known in our area. The Soros funded organization, when did they make any sort of contribution, and how much was that?
My understanding it was, and I read this recently, though I don't recall the details, was that it was when the ERIC system was first established, and it was a substantial amount, but I'm not I don't recall the
And what
exact number.
organization was that?
The Open Borders Foundation, Open Societies.
The Open Borders
I
Foundation?
don't recall. She has the name here.
Because
The
I have looked
Open,
at the 990s. I mean, I haven't found, I don't recollect that as, part of any of their revenue or funding.
I do know that the funding from that organization often goes through smaller organizations and it's funneled through them, but it has come to them through the Open Society Foundation, which is a global effort by Mr. Soros. Pardon?
You first told me it was Open Borders, and now you said Open Society. I'm just.
I forget whether it's Open Society that advocates for open borders or whether it's Open Borders that's advocating for a global open society. But the two are terms used often interchangeably, but you're right, there is a legitimate there is an actual legal term that is part of the name of the foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Please.
If I can just respond to one point that was unrelated to Eric there and about accusations about what Mr. Parks knows and slow rolling of judicial proceedings and so forth. I just want to make sure we're clear about a couple of things. One, we're talking about voters' signatures, and people's signatures are very much considered personally identifying information under federal law, the law of many states, and by the declaration of the Department of State, which specifically encouraged boards of election to consider whether signatures of voters should be redacted under the Pennsylvania Constitution. So we're not talking about something that is outrageous or stupid or unreasonable. Second of all, the allegation that regarding slow walking cases in the Court of Common Pleas is not, I take it, an allegation against this board or me, because I don't have any control over the calendar of the Court of Common Pleas. I believe that's an allegation against the duly elected judges of the Court of Common Pleas of Delaware County, which I think is a rather stunning and remarkable assertion. So I just would note that for the record as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, my name's Vanessa Mortillo. I'm from media. I've never done this before, but I really, I'm here in support of democracy. I think it's so important to safeguard our elections, and I'm just very thankful that you're doing so. It's really sad to me to hear a lot of misinformation about Eric. I urge you to just, keep doing what you're doing, stay involved, because we have a lot of misinformation, a lot of attacks on democracy. Like I said, I've never done this before, but it's so important. This is a privilege to even have a democracy. And I just want to thank you for staying involved in Eric and kind of staying in the course. And just obviously you do a lot of hard work, difficult work, sometimes boring work to make this all function. And yeah, I'm just here to say thank you and voice my support for Eric.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I just want to respond real quickly. The real hard work here is done by our staff. I
Yeah,
just
that's
wanna-
true.
What we do is kind of fun and interesting and
We're trying to
yeah.
decide whether I haven't found anything boring yet, but I.
No.
But I
It can be a little hard reading stuff, but the professional staff are the ones doing the really hard work. And I want to make sure everyone remembers we're just the volunteers to make some big idea decisions from time to time.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, good morning. My name is Tom Cavanaugh. I'm from Bethel Township. I've been a lifelong resident of Delaware County and recently retired after a 40-year career as an engineer. So my worldview is to deal in facts and data and to use facts and data to drive our decisions, to work together. Everything that I know about the ERIC system is that it is facts and data driven. I'm sure, like every other system, there are imperfections to it. I think we need to continue to use facts and data to drive toward how we want to optimize this situation, which is, in my view at least, maximize the accuracy of the voting, maximize the number of people who are eligible to and encouraged to vote, and minimize the errors and minimize the fraud. And I support the continued use of the ERIC system and encourage this body to continue to push forward with constantly making that system better.
Thank you. Congratulations on your retirement, and I hope you will enjoy then the facts and data that Mr. Allen does intend to present shortly on this, Eric, because I thought it was impressive last time when Ms. Winterbottom presented it. Or I'm sorry, you may be, someone else may be presenting it, but it's interesting. So thank you.
I'll look forward to it. If he's got a spreadsheet, then I'm going to be really excited. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, then then yes, thank you very much.
Oh, it's still morning. Good morning. I'm Jill Fenninger, 512 Askin Road, Radnor Township. This is also my first meeting. I'm here today for two purposes. Number one, I would like to thank Ashley Lunkenheimer, John McLean, and Scott Alberts for your diligent and careful work to conduct fair elections that ensure that all registered voters have access to voting. I am exceedingly grateful for your efforts, and I'm so glad that I have the chance to tell you in person, and it's actually been a privilege to watch you in action, so thank you. Number two, I want to express my support of and confidence in the security of the ERIC system, and I endorse the continued use. I believe they will help improve the accuracy of our voter rolls, increase access to voter registration for all eligible citizens, reduce election costs, and increase efficiency in elections. I believe it's a no-brainer. But I do want to speak to the people who have anxiety, who've spoken earlier today about data security. I'm 70 years old, so I grew up in a cash and bank check world. The idea of paying my bill at Giant with a credit card would be alien to me. If I wanted to order something from LL Bean, I would call and talk to a person and give them my credit card number over the phone, and we thought that was okay. It's a new world, and we have to do a risk-benefit analysis. Medical records are being shared now, and I feel that the benefits of ERIC far exceed the risks. I think they have a robust data security system. I'm confident in them. And so let's proceed. Finally, I believe a state's voter registration rolls are the foundation of free, fair, and accurate elections. So let us do everything we can to strengthen that foundation, and that includes partnering with ERIC. Thank you.
We'll just remind you that our staff is the best. Right? The teams that make it happen are Mr. Allen and all of those who work with him to make it happen. So they are the best.
There's no limit to what you can achieve when you don't care who gets the credit, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, then I have promised, oh, sorry, we're gonna have the status of annual voter list maintenance projects before we get to the data.
Michelle.
Oh, no, this will be the data. I'm sorry. Michelle.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So in June, we sent out
Could you introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Michelle
You're
Denars from-
great, and I just want to make sure that people know who you are.
Michelle Denars from voter registration, the office manager. Sorry. In June, we sent out a total of 10,479 ERIC letters. As of yesterday, July 24th, we received 4,085 undeliverables, 462 moved out of state, 292 moved in county, 53 moved out of county, 12 deceased, 2 requests to cancel, for a total of 4,906 that was returned.
Thanks. And I guess it was a shorter data presentation the last time, but what impresses me or continues to impress me about this data is that when the ERIC letters go out saying that there may be some concern, the amount of hits that get that was accurate, that there is a concern that someone's deceased, that they moved, that they want it canceled, that percentage is to me continually impressive. Does anybody have any questions for Michelle? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Allen.
So just as background, the Electronic Registration Information Center was founded in 2012. And it's important to note that it was founded in 2012 for a couple of reasons. There was an allusion earlier to, first off, let's talk about why it was founded. There are several tasks that all of us as states need to perform. But there are several tasks that we need to perform well together. I can't imagine transportation departments not sharing data on highways so that they, that we don't have to get off an interstate and then take another road up 50 miles to connect with Ohio's interstate. Similarly, the Social Security Administration itself relies on a private nonpartisan, which was somehow used to disparage the ERIC system, that it's a private nonprofit. Well, it's a cooperative effort by various states to use their voter registration data, gather in national change of address data from the Postal Service, and also gather in Social Security Administration data on who's died so that we can remove that from the voter rolls. Because in some cases, a person who was registered specifically in Delaware County might have gone to late life care, perhaps across the state line in Delaware. And we're not going to know about that death certificate, perhaps for many years, until a family member comes to the polls and says, oh, well, why is he still on there? Similarly, we have people who move and within Delaware County or to other counties within Pennsylvania or out of state. And they're going to update their driver's license. They're going to update their state ID wherever they're going to live. They're going to update their insurance, what have you. But a lot of times, especially with the generation that's coming up, they do not file a national change of address system. If they do, we get that through the ERIC system. If they don't, we get the fact that they've changed their driver's license or state ID to a new state or to a new address within that state. And we're able to send out and flag that voter registration. So the Social Security Administration itself relies upon one of these not-for-profit organizations that probably no one in this room has heard of. And it's called the National Association for Public Health Statistics and Information Systems, NAFSIS. Yes, I just revealed myself to be a geek, okay? But NAFSIS is, again, an interstate organization designed to make sure that there is a central national database of all of the birth and death records from across these United States, plus some of our protectorates, including Guam. And NAFSIS helps make sure that if a person moves or goes into elder care or whatever and dies, that the Social Security Administration can learn and cut off those benefits and save other Social Security beneficiaries from having all of our contributions wasted. So this was founded as a way to crunch the numbers and crunch the data. It originally had 7 original member states. Oh, and one other reason it's important to point out that they were founded in 2012 with the assistance of, not the direction of, Pew Charitable Trust. Pew Charitable Trust takes in about $300 million a year. There was a donation involving Mr. Soros's organization of $500,000 in 2009. It had nothing to do with the foundation of ERIC. So there were 7 original member states, both Democratic and Republican. It received assistance from Pew Charitable Trusts. It has been managed consistently and run by the member states since shortly after its foundation. And one of the efforts of the board of directors over ERIC has been to try to grow its membership, and it did so successfully. It has been funded and managed entirely by the member states for these many years. ERIC's mission and operations, I've described it, combination of voter registration records, driver's license, state IDs, social security number data, and death records is used to cross-reference. It is done very securely, and it was partly ERIC evolved as a response to a very unsecure system that originated out of the state of Kansas that involved email swapping of spreadsheets with people's dates of birth, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, everything but their mother's maiden name. And it was a very highly unsecure system. It was known as the interstate cross-check. This provides us with reports that we don't get any social security number information. We don't get any date of birth information. Whatever information we already have, we have. We only get reports saying Delaware County, here are the Delaware County voters that fit into these categories and who need to have a mailing. And if the mailing comes back undeliverable, boom, we can flag that individual as inactive. And that puts them on the timeline under the Help America Vote Act and the National Voter Registration Act to be eventually removed from the voter rolls if they remain inactive for 4+ years, 2 federal election cycles. So it provides lists of actionable records. It provides lists of actionable records where the voters have died, have moved, like I said, within the county. So we're able to update records. Sometimes, someone goes from, perhaps, from Springfield to another community to Morton, and we're able to update their record and send them a new card and verify that we send a mailing of a card to that new address in Morton, verify if it bounces back as undeliverable, then we don't change the address. But for the most part, this works wonderfully. And that voter then gets their new polling place and votes in the proper location where they're legally, lawfully eligible to cast a ballot. Next. So the ERIC states benefit by having cleaner voter rolls. And we benefit that the more states that are in it, the more we're able to cross reference cleanly and securely with other states. It also, by initiating, and this is a point of contention, I understand, by initiating mailings to eligible voters who the systems have identified have moved into a location but have not yet registered, that helps us avoid the chaos and the overwhelming burden of having a rush of registrations all come in the October before a presidential election. It levels off some of this registration activity to year round so that maybe they just go to the DMV, maybe they register online, maybe they register by mail, or they register in person, but they don't all do it. Oh my goodness, I've moved since the last election. I need to do it in October. So I want to go through, I was challenged at the last meeting very pointedly when I said, I can't understand why any state would forego this system. And someone pointed at me from that lectern and said, do your job. Now, technically, it's not my job to explain the unexplainable, but I'm going to try. So this is Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate. He called ERIC a godsend. That was just months before Iowa political pressure built up and they bowed out of ERIC. I don't know why you call anything a godsend. That would be some kind of bag of horrors. West Virginia Secretary of State, Andrew McCoy, Mac Warner. The ERIC system provided a long overdue of cleansing of the voter rolls. They had not been a part of ERIC, and once they joined, all of their local election officials were enjoying the ability to go through and get rid of the dead weight on their voter rolls. As Missouri Secretary of State John J. Ashcroft, upon having Missouri join ERIC. This agreement with ERIC will help affirm voters are eligible and registered in the right location, identify potential duplicate registrations, which it does, and identify unregistered voters so we can help them get registered. This is his deputy, Trish Vincent. Last December and last fall, when state lawmakers in Missouri were saying, hey, we're hearing rumblings about how ERIC is really bad, she wrote back in an email, this is totally false. Again, people spreading things out of fear. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, one of my administration's top priorities is protecting the integrity of Florida's elections, which is why joining ERIC is the right thing to do. He ended the long debate in Florida by joining ERIC shortly after he took office in 2019. But more importantly, he formed in 2022 an election integrity unit like no other state has ever formed. It's called the OECS. It's the Office of Election Crimes and Security. It issued its first annual report in January of 2023. I'm going to repeat that. That was just 6 months ago, January of 2023. And that report praised the ability to access data through ERIC to identify approximately 1,177 voters who appear to have voted in Florida and in one of the other member states in the same election. A number of these cases are in the preliminary investigative stage, while a number of others have already been referred for criminal prosecution. The data provided by ERIC offers a way for states who participate to share voter information and to help find individuals who may have cast more than one ballot in a primary or a general election. That same report, which is available on the internet right now, went on to say that the difficulty in dealing with non-ERIC states is that they have to subpoena records, and then they have to get files, and they have to hire programmers, and they have to try to cross-reference these data. And whereas the ERIC system allows them to flag any kind of double votes and provides for security. Ohio Secretary of State, Frank LaRose. One of the big reasons voter fraud is so rare is because states are stepping up to enforce the law whenever it is broken. And that was in 2019 when he made a call to prosecute 18 Ohioans for voting twice based on data from ERIC. He added as recently as February 2023, the little secret is that maybe more than 10 years ago, meaning 2012, if somebody voted in Ohio and Florida and Arizona and Texas, you would have never known. With ERIC, we can compare our voter rolls to those states. Shortly after that statement, pressure built in Ohio, and Ohio dropped out. I mean, it is maintained now by the states. This is Alabama Secretary of State Wes Allen, who campaigned on jumping away from ERIC last year. So he was confronted about how Soros didn't really fund it, and he finally responded, I mean, it is maintained now by the states, but it really doesn't matter. If it was a leftist group or a right group, whoever, we just feel, you know, I heard loud and clear on the campaign trail. In other words, the system worked, but he was bowing to political pressure. Judicial Watch. This is of note. This is a news clip from Judicial Watch, which won. And Judicial Watch has been a very effective conservative organization that has filed lawsuits in states where they have bloated voter registration rolls. In other words, they file litigation to force the cleaning up of the voter rolls in jurisdictions that maybe it's a small county and it has 2,000 people who are voting eligible age and who are U.S. citizens, and yet they have 2,800 people on the rolls. And Judicial Watch has been at the head of the line of bringing these kinds of litigation. Judicial Watch won. They fought Kentucky over the bloated rolls in Kentucky. And as part of the court settlement, in other words, Judicial Watch's attorneys, as officers of the court, went before a judge and said, the only way we can settle this is to force Kentucky to join ERIC. And just recently, Judicial Watch decided that ERIC really isn't that good. Now, Kentucky is stuck under a court order because this was agreed upon by the court by Judicial Watch and the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So here's a map. There's one addition to this of the various states. The ones in pink are the ones that are involved to this day. The ones in dark red or maroon are the ones that have left in recent months. 4 days ago, Texas joined that. And Texas is, since I was challenged to provide an explanation of why Texas dropped out, Texas said it's dropping out because the cost has increased for the remaining member states because others have dropped out. Now, you would think, two thoughts come to mind as an election administrator who's been in this business for 17 years. One, it's going to cost a heck of a lot more to hire programmers and do all kinds of, create your own system from scratch. Two, if you thought the cost was going up because states were dropping out, you might want to encourage them to get back in or encourage other states to join. There's been no evidence that any of the data that have ever been supplied by ERIC to local jurisdictions have been identify a false notification of things, records where the persons may have moved. So what changed? What suddenly changed last fall and this year? Websites that peddle conspiracies began attacking ERIC. And I want to point this out. They were quoting the work of a respected conservative attorney by the name of J. Christian Adams. J. Christian Adams often speaks out on how he was critical of ERIC, but he was critical of ERIC saying they ought to even do more. They ought to take in private data from insurance companies. He's the president and general counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which, if you know anything about, it's a very conservative organization that brings lawsuits. He had examined the ERIC system for a year, and his strongest critique was not enough to remove dead voters. Not that it wasn't working or that it was violating secrecy. Not enough. This is J. Christian Adams talking recently about states who have dropped out of ERIC. It's this crazy zeal to get out of ERIC that is going to cause voter fraud to flourish. My view is that it's better to be in ERIC than not in ERIC. And thirdly, it's absolutely impossible to do cross-state checking to see who's voting twice in federal elections without ERIC. So, again, I go back to what I said originally. I can't understand why other states have dropped out. It's going to hurt our ability to clean our rolls by losing Florida because we have people who have homes here and spend winter there, or they've retired there, and we're not going to have easy access to dual registrations. And I hope that we don't lose Arizona because that's another destination state. So I'm going to go back to one last remark from Ohio Secretary of State, one that he couldn't understand is so prescient. Hopefully, over time, the noise about this starts to die down and other states look to get back into it. And with that, members of the board, I recommend the resolution that Pennsylvania continue to utilize. And this is not a decision that Delaware County can make, whether to participate in ERIC or not. It's something that the Department of State has in its power to do. And I would encourage the board to vote in the affirmative to urge the Department of State to continue to work with the ERIC system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I didn't do a cross check. The resolution that was attached to these materials, is it slightly modified from the resolution that was presented that you read out loud? I believe you read out loud at our last meeting.
No, it has not.
Okay. All right, Mr. McLean, do you have any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, my comment would be, first of all, I want to thank you and Mr. Alberts last month for agreeing to postpone this for a month so I could educate myself better on the system. And since that time, I have spent hours taking a look at the ERIC system and information that's been provided to me by individuals who are opposed to the use of the ERIC system. And also, I've listened to Mr. Allen's thoughts on it and done my own looking for it. And first of all, as Mr. Allen just pointed out, so it's clear for the public, Delaware County doesn't contract with ERIC, nor do we sign on to this agreement. I guess the Department of State, in order to help bolster itself, wanted counties to sort of give them a pat on the back and ask the counties to adopt this type of resolution. So they placed us in this position. But that being said, I think there's a benefit to having ERIC. It is the only system right now that is being used nationally to clean up the voter rolls. We heard from Michelle today, and we heard from Crystal in the past. Just this latest round that was sent out, there was, based on the statistics she gave us today, over 4,900 individuals would be removed from the rolls that shouldn't be there in Delaware County. Without this system, we wouldn't have that. So the criticisms that I've seen and read about are twofold. Number one is the worry about data security. And I've looked and I can't find anything that has indicated that there has been any data security breaches or releases of information from the ERIC system. And I think that, if there were, there would be attorney generals or other states that would have brought actions or done something to take a look at that. Their policy, and I don't find anything that contradicts or indicates that they've done it, is that they do not share information with political committees or advocacy groups. There are federal laws actually that limit what type of data can even be released. But their policy is that they do not do that. The second reason why people have objections to it is the policy of ERIC, that in addition to sort of this data scrubbing of or removal of bad people from the polling, that there must be outreach done to those who are, as they call them, UBEs, unregistered but eligible. And there's perception, I guess, among some that that somehow that is targeted at certain types of people, which is not the case. Maybe the perception is that people who are unregistered, and simply the way that they do that is they compare Department of Motor Vehicle records and those who hold a state identification to the voter records. That's the only classifications that are made. It's not done by race or by age or by location. But those, mailings are done to those folks who hold some sort of identification or hold a driver's license but are not registered. And there's a mailing that goes out to them once every 2 years to 95% of them, that tells them, gives them information about how they can register if they wish to register. Which, quite honestly, is the same thing that's done at a when you go to renew your driver's license at the driver's license center. So, I mean, this is nothing that isn't already being done elsewhere by the state. So I don't find the issues that are there. I've looked in some of the allegations, and I just simply can't find the data and facts to support a lot of the allegations. There are the members of the board of directors. It is a nonprofit, and you can argue about whether a nonprofit should do it, but then the nonprofit's not going to do it. The federal government's not doing it. And then I kind of come back to, well, nonprofit might do a better job than the federal government anyway, doing it. But the nonprofit board of directors are all members of governments, either in some cases elected officials and in some cases appointed officials. Pennsylvania has somebody who has been working in the Department of State for a number of years as a member of, is on the executive board. Truth be told, he's not my favorite person, actually, but he's the person from Pennsylvania that represents it there. If there were a problem or a doubt about whether it's partisan, I would say to people in my own party, we ought to join in because we have more Republican administrations in the country, in states, than there are Democrats. So if that was the issue about control or worried about it, if we just join, we would have control of the organization. So, I think it's fairly evened out now in terms of representatives from different states, on the board. So all that being said, like anything, it's not a perfect system. If you want to try to find flaws or raise questions, you can do that. But it is an effective system for us and in Delaware County to eliminate people who should not be registered to vote. And I believe, and I've observed it for many years now, that probably the most fertile area for anybody that wants to commit voter fraud is to somehow step into the shoes of somebody that is registered to vote, but is not going to vote. Whether that be by, some type of absentee ballot, or whether it being, on election day, somebody goes in and votes that person. And I don't believe that that's widespread, but I believe it occurs in limited areas. And so the best way to address that is to eliminate people who are registered to vote, who shouldn't be registered to vote here. Or for the double votes that do occur on a limited basis, in every election that goes on. So with that, since it has been placed in our laps, but, we're not contracting with Eric, I would support the resolution to, have continued use of the Eric system until there's something better in place. In Pennsylvania right now, there are legislators talking about improving the system or doing something different, and good. If we think we can come up with something better than the ERIC system here in Pennsylvania or nationwide, good, do it then. Don't raise questions or just criticize. Go ahead and do it. The local government commission, I think, is looking at it. Fine, let them look at it, come up with something different. But the just raising the questions themselves and saying it's not right, I disagree with, until you present me with more facts. And that's why I've asked people to present me with specific facts. I don't have anything on the contrary that outweighs the benefits of the system. So with that, I would support the proposed resolution.
Thank you, Mr. McBlain. Mr. Alberts?
Apart from maybe adding some strongly worded invective about the integrity of Florida elections in general, and not wanting to follow any example that they set, I would agree that Mr. McBlain has said everything that I would want to say. So.
And we also had a long hearing about this last time. Mr. McBlain, thank you very much. I think it summarized it is, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think that all the data presented, thank you today, but also at the last meeting, overwhelmingly indicates that this is good. And I support the resolution as well. So with that, do we have a motion to adopt the resolution proposed by Mr. Allen?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. That motion passes. Any other matters, Mr. Allen or Mr. Perks?
No, there are not.
Anything from the board?
Me.
Oh, sorry. Anything from the board? Nope. Then with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.